Bene, allora benvenuti a tutti a questo primo incontro della serie di webinar Cibo per la vita, giustizia alimentare e cibo per tutti, nato dalla collaborazione tra la Segreteria di Stato della Santa Sede, il Dicastero per il Servizio dello Sviluppo Umano Integrale, la Commissione Vaticana Covid-19, la missione permanente della Santa Sede presso la FAO, l'IFAD e il PAM e il Forum Roma delle ONG di ispirazione cattolica. Significativamente, questo primo incontro si svolge all'inizio della settimana Laudato Si, che nelle parole del Papa pronunciate all'Angelus di ieri ci aiuterà ad educarci sempre di più ad ascoltare il grido della terra e il grido dei poveri. Ed è il primo webinar di una serie di 3 che si svolge in preparazione al pre-vertice delle Nazioni Unite sui sistemi alimentari, che come è noto si svolgerà a Roma dal 26 al 28 luglio prossimo e vuole mostrare come una ecologia integrale può ispirare la rigenerazione dei sistemi alimentari nel futuro post-Covid, evidenziando come i diversi attori della Chiesa possono contribuire alla trasformazione dei sistemi alimentari verso la cura della casa comune, il rispetto della dignità umana e il servizio del bene comune. Ci guiderà l'enciclica Laudato Si attraverso l'ascolto e la ricerca del dialogo all'interno e all'esterno della Chiesa, mettendo in atto quelle iniziative tese a collegare le buone pratiche che in tutto il mondo si muovono a favore di sistemi alimentari sostenibili, elevando le voci tradizionalmente escluse per ispirare un appello alla giustizia alimentare. Questo primo incontro sul ruolo delle donne nella promozione dello sviluppo umano integrale si sforzerà di esplorare, attraverso il contributo di qualificate relatrici, la situazione delle donne nei nostri sistemi alimentari, nel contesto di pandemia, con enfasi su come sostenere la loro leadership nel plasmare sistemi alimentari resilienti in tutto il mondo. Il webinar è stato registrato come dialogo indipendente del Food System Summit, in modo che i risultati saranno incorporati nel processo del Summit per aiutare a guidare l'azione individuale e collettiva verso un futuro del cibo che sia sostenibile, equo e sicuro. Ringraziamo naturalmente sin d'ora le diverse relatrici per aver accettato l'invito e per il contributo che ci offriranno dalla loro esperienza dei diversi campi in cui operano e nelle diverse parti del mondo in cui vivono ed operano. Il webinar, come sapete, è strutturato in 3 sessioni di circa 55 minuti ciascuno. Il primo, Donne e sviluppo, si esploreranno le sfide che le donne nei contesti rurali devono affrontare per quanto riguarda l'insicurezza alimentare ed i loro contributi unici ai sistemi di produzione agroalimentare. Il secondo, Donne e pace, si evidenzieranno le lotte spesso invisibili delle donne in contesti di emergenza alimentare e le loro voci in contesti internazionali e politici. Il terzo, Donne e famiglia, si esploreranno le opportunità e le misure per sostenere il ruolo delle donne nei sistemi alimentari. Tra ogni sessione ci sarà una breve pausa in cui naturalmente potrete vedere diverse presentazioni multimediali e sono disponibili traduzioni in inglese, spagnolo e italiano. Per questo potete cliccare sull'icona del globo in fondo allo schermo per scegliere la lingua che si preferisce. La chat box è poi a vostra disposizione per offrire i vostri commenti e le vostre domande e naturalmente, tempo permettendo, le relatrici risponderanno. Il Forum Roma, anche in questa occasione, vuole offrire con tutti gli altri attori coinvolti il suo contributo di idee e di pensiero, impegnandosi a diffondere una nuova cultura capace di rimettere al centro di ogni processo la persona e di questi la più piccola e la più indifesa. Grazie allora a tutti i partecipanti e darei subito la parola alla dottoressa Marian Cusimano dell'Università Cattolica d'America, membro della Commissione Vaticana Covid-19, per introdurre appunto questo evento. Grazie alla dottoressa Marian e grazie ancora a tutti voi e buon lavoro a tutti quelli che ci stanno seguendo in video. Grazie.
Thank you, and welcome to all who are coming to our discussion today. As we mark Laudato Si week, Pope Francis offers a good framework for our discussion today when he says, "I urgently appeal for a new dialogue about how we are shaping the future. We need a conversation which includes everyone, since the challenges we are undergoing concern and affect us all." That will be part of our discussion both today and in the seminars to follow. On the one hand, there is hope. On the positive side, significant gains have been made for women and girls' integral development since the Millennium Development Goals were established over 20 years ago. The rates of women and girls going to school, finishing their education have increased, as have women's receipt of some payment for their labor. Before the pandemic, progress was made to reduce rates of hunger and extreme poverty, to raise women's access to nutrition, education, and health outcomes. The Millennium Development Goals were expanded upon with the Sustainable Development Goals that also embraced women's integral development and the expansion of food security, particularly as both are challenged by climate change and environmental harms. Also, in a sign of progress, we mark this year the 20th anniversary of UN Security Council Resolution 1325, which led the United Nations Women, Peace, and Security resolutions and agenda, and it helped create goals, commitment, benchmarks, and metrics for expanding the inclusion of women in peace and security processes and outcomes. So there is much to be hopeful about. However, challenges remain. And as we will hear from our speakers today, the pandemic has undermined this progress made toward these goals. And even before the pandemic, progress toward expanding women and girls' integral development and security has not been equal and has not been uniform. Even before the pandemic, women do most of the unpaid labor around the world. Women and girls comprise over 60% of the world's poor subsistence farmers, too often performing unpaid labor and working land for which they have no formal land rights and experiencing food insecurity. Women are much less likely to have access to a formal banking or a bank account. Most of the countries which did not reach the Millennium Development Goals in women's empowerment were in sub-Saharan Africa. And those countries in Africa and the Middle East today have the lowest scores for women's development. In my research, I talked with women around the world, some of whom were instrumental in rewriting their own constitutions and laws in their countries to make it legal for women to own land and to own property. But they unfortunately report that while the legal codes have changed, often the cultural practices and the implementation of those laws lag behind, so that women are still deprived of basic rights. For example, more than 80% of the world's farmland is owned by men. So women farm that land, but have no formal rights to it. The world's most food insecure countries are also the world's youngest countries, primarily those in Africa. Around the world, women and girls go hungry more than men and boys, and this gender gap for food insecurity is worse in Africa, and those are also the world's most food insecure countries. They are also the countries which remain stuck in major armed conflict. Food insecurity is worse in countries at war. Food can be used as a weapon of war, and the causality goes both ways. In a negative feedback loop, conflict often is exacerbated by food insecurity. with fighting breaking out between farmers and herders, with fighting often sparked around food markets. You can't build peace on an empty stomach, and you cannot feed the hungry without women's empowerment. Countries such as Nigeria, Syria, Yemen, South Sudan, the Democratic Republic of Congo, these countries need economic growth and growth in food security to break out of the cycle of a conflict trap of recurring cycles of violence and vengeance. Expanding women's integral development is thus important not only as a value in and of itself, as a basic value of human life and dignity, but it is also necessary both to end hunger and to end wars. Research by the FAO shows that expanding women's resources, even just to the level of poor men, would lift 150 million people out of hunger every year. Research shows that women's economic development has a great cascading effect. Women spread resources around. They particularly invest in families and children. When women have economic power, they invest in the children, in food, in education, in healthcare for children. Where women have economic empowerment, child mortality is greatly reduced. And when women are included in decision-making, peace accords are much more likely to last. Long before the pandemic, Pope Francis noted that this economy kills, that the inequalities and exclusions of our current political and economic systems have lethal consequences. Thus, we need to build more inclusive, integrated systems so that the fruits of the earth can benefit everyone. As Pope Francis said in Laudato Si', we must bring the whole human family together to sustainable and integral development. And to do so, we must have more inclusive dialogue to shape a different future. Today's webinar and the subsequent ones to follow this urging of Laudato Si' to expand the dialogue to build a healthier and a more just future. I thank all of you for joining us in this dialogue.
Thank you, Dr. Marianne Love, for that important grounding. This is such an exciting conversation to be having. I am Carrie Medic, and I'm delighted to be among all of you today. I bring warm greetings from Minneapolis, Minnesota. Good morning, afternoon, and evening from wherever you may be in the world. As Marianne noted, our task today is to shine a light on the vital role that women play in society and in food production, and to create ways to increase and strengthen their participation even further. It's painfully clear women's voices have largely been neglected in decision-making processes locally, regionally, and at global levels due to enduring underrepresentation in senior leadership. And the burden they face in rural contexts is particularly harsh. So we aim to interject women's voices into the global food debate today, and in the context of a global pandemic that is greatly disrupting our consciousness about what is possible. Women bear the greatest hardship of food insecurity, yet are also part of the solution. As Marianne noted, 60% of those that are food insecure are women and girls. And according to recent data from the UN Women Report, ensuring women have greater access to agricultural resources would increase female farm returns up to 30% and increase agricultural production in developing countries up to 4%. And what this means is freeing nearly 150 million people from undernourishment. So what is stopping such a global transformation from happening? Today, I am joined by an esteemed set of accomplished women ready to help us answer this question. I'll begin with a brief introduction of each speaker. They will speak for about 5 to 7 minutes, and then we'll close with a few questions. We hope that you leave today with a clear sense of the facts about the vital role that women play in food production. Before we start, the 3 things to be listening for in the discussion. The first, women play a central role in food production at home, in community, and beyond, and yet they're routinely left out of decision-making, which grossly limits progress. Food justice is social justice at all levels, from household to community and beyond. Both food justice and social justice must be pursued in tandem, not separately. And finally, this is about human dignity and planting seeds of hope. By creating conditions where women have necessary access to finance, equitable division of household labor, and decision-making power, we improve food security for all, and anything becomes possible. I'm so delighted to start by introducing Dr. Daniela Fumarola. Daniela is the Confederal Secretary of the Italian Confederation of Trade Unions. With over 30 years of experience, Daniela brings the perspective of millions of workers with a key message of putting people at the center of solutions. She'll speak to the dignity of work, the avoidance of child labor, a focus on resiliency and recovery, and equal rights and collective bargaining as a tool. Daniela, the floor is yours.
Grazie per questa opportunità che mi date di esprimere il punto di vista della CISL a questo importante incontro. Sono molto contenta di essere qui con voi. Vi porto i saluti del nostro segretario generale Luigi Sbarra, che nel suo precedente incarico è stato protagonista della lotta sindacale contro il caporalato in agricoltura, che ha condotto ad una legge tra le più avanzate a livello internazionale. Parlare di cibo e sviluppo ci riconduce immediatamente, come avete detto, al mondo agricolo, una comunità di donne e uomini che ogni giorno vivono in prima persona la fatica che si nasconde dietro tanti prodotti di eccellenza. Donne e uomini che in questo anno terribile funestato dal Covid in tutto il mondo hanno continuato a lavorare garantendo la sopravvivenza alimentare alle comunità. Se c'è una cosa che la pandemia ci ha insegnato è che siamo tutti legati allo stesso destino. Vale per il mondo del lavoro e per i popoli dei nostri paesi. E se è vero che la terra è un dono, è anche vero che per renderla fertile, per trasformarla, per difenderla, occorre il lavoro delle persone. È nel lavoro umano che si trova la chiave di volta dello sviluppo sostenibile. È il lavoro che ci porterà fuori da questa crisi che ha colpito soprattutto le donne e i giovani. Pensate che in Italia solo nel mese di dicembre su 101.000 posti di lavoro persi, 99.000 erano donne. Bene, io credo che la terra sia il luogo per eccellenza di un patto tra generazioni e generi. E come ha scritto Antoine de Saint-Exupéry, non ereditiamo la terra dai nostri avi, ma ce la facciamo prestare dai nostri figli. Per una sindacalista questo messaggio assume un valore doppio, significa che abbiamo il compito di utilizzarla, ma allo stesso tempo di consegnarla più feconda, migliorata a chi verrà dopo di noi. E tutto questo presuppone impegno e sostegno speciali, perché l'agroalimentare non è un settore come tutti quanti gli altri. Il lavoro che lo sostiene è un lavoro speciale che unisce il sacrificio alla professionalità e alla passione, in tanti casi di tante donne. Noi oggi dobbiamo piantare il seme di un modello di sviluppo solidale, più solidale, che metta al centro la tutela del suolo e della persona che lavora. È un aspetto essenziale anche nel nostro paese, dove lottiamo quotidianamente per dare garanzia a centinaia di migliaia di lavoratrici e lavoratori dell'agricoltura, della trasformazione alimentare, dei comparti ambientali. Riscoprire il valore e i valori del lavoro agroalimentare vuol dire anche parlare di una Unione Europea, vuol dire parlare all'Unione Europea ancora di più oggi. E questo significa promuovere in tutte le sedi comunitarie la difesa di una politica di sviluppo agroalimentare ancorata saldamente a un modello sociale. Significa anche avere un'impostazione che ci deve tenere lontani da trattati internazionali privi di clausole a tutela della dignità della persona e del lavoro. Un'impostazione che ripudi qualunque forma di sfruttamento femminile e minorile, sia negli stati ad economia avanzata che nelle nazioni del secondo e terzo mondo, dove si estendono le catene di fornitura delle multinazionali. Bisogna dire no ad ogni accordo gestito in stanze chiuse a doppia mandata. Dobbiamo opporci ad ogni intesa che non sia limpida su principi di sostenibilità e di precauzione. Dobbiamo dire no come comunità sociale internazionale agli accordi nel segno del liberismo più sfrenato, che considerano le norme a tutela delle lavoratrici e dei lavoratori, le conquiste della contrattazione, le considerano ostacoli per il commercio. La contrattazione non è un ostacolo, non è un freno, ma al contrario è un motore che genera diritti e crescita equa. L'obiettivo quindi è coniugare il miglioramento delle condizioni delle lavoratrici e dei lavoratori a una maggiore produttività e competitività di sistema. L'eccellenza del nostro sistema primario nasce da filiere che investono sulla crescita del capitale umano, che fanno formazione, che applicano i contratti e che coltivano relazioni sindacali, bilaterali, responsabili e costruttive, che rafforzano il sistema delle tutele attraverso un welfare che guarda di più e meglio alla necessità che il lavoro di cura appartenga a uomini e donne. C'è un tempo per seminare e un tempo per raccogliere, si legge nel Vangelo. Ecco, noi tutti dobbiamo essere consapevoli di vivere nel tempo della semina. La crisi devastante che ha colpito il mondo senza distinzioni e in cui siamo ancora fatalmente immersi, ci ricorda che il nostro cammino verso uno sviluppo sostenibile, verso la ricostruzione, è ben lontano dal traguardo. Per tanti versi deve ancora cominciare. In questo tempo le donne, il lavoro delle donne, il valore delle donne può e deve essere e deve fare la differenza. Le considerevoli risorse disponibili nel Recovery Fund, la declinazione che il governo italiano fa nel Piano Nazionale di Ripresa e Resilienza, sono uno strumento fondamentale e anche una grande occasione che, come ci ricorda il Santo Padre, non dobbiamo assolutamente sprecare. Donne e giovani sono trasversali nelle 6 missioni, ma non devono rimanere solo un buon proposito. I contenuti del piano vanno implementati con maggiori interventi. Faccio solo un esempio. Nella seconda missione, che riguarda rivoluzione verde e transizione ecologica, per garantire impatti significativi in termini di occupazione femminile, è indispensabile che vengano sviluppati percorsi di orientamento e formazione dedicati alle donne e vanno previsti specifici sgravi fiscali per la loro assunzione, in un contesto che, al contrario, è fortemente caratterizzato da una presenza di lavoratori uomini. Ecco, allora noi abbiamo tanto da fare. E riusciremo a farlo se nel Paese sarà chiaro che la ricostruzione dovrà passare dalla valorizzazione delle potenzialità umane, le donne e i giovani, quelle economiche, quelle di sistema che finora non sono state valorizzate. Il nostro domani è quello che oggi sapremo costruire insieme e per farlo dobbiamo sconfiggere i nemici, il virus e la diseguaglianza che la pandemia ha rinforzato, un gap che carica di sofferenza proprio quelle realtà deboli che invece andrebbero sostenute secondo un principio di lungimirante e doverosa solidarietà. Il divario mondiale nei livelli di nutrizione è semplicemente spaventoso. Circa un terzo del cibo prodotto nel mondo, secondo la FAO, finisce nei rifiuti prima ancora di essere immesso in circolazione. Lo spreco è superiore al 1 miliardo di tonnellate l'anno, per un valore che sfiora il $1 miliardo. Per contro, la fame cronica colpisce ancora nel mondo circa 800 milioni di persone. Il paradosso è sotto gli occhi di tutti e genera rabbia e indignazione. Ma rabbia e indignazione non bastano, perché il seme della speranza non germoglia da solo, va piantato, va innaffiato e difeso da un'azione partecipata che non esclude la responsabilità di nessuno. Lavoro, imprese, istituzioni, il sistema educativo, il processo di cambiamento verso un paradigma più solidale, efficiente e sostenibile passa per un'alleanza che vada oltre i sistemi normativi e deve farsi coscienza condivisa e collettiva, un impegno quotidiano per tutti. E questa è in fondo la vocazione che abbiamo ereditato nell'enciclica di Papa Francesco, una rinnovata speranza per la salute del pianeta, la tutela delle risorse, una promessa concreta e solenne per la dignità di chi opera e lavora ogni giorno, prendendosi cura della terra e dei nostri figli. Speranza e promessa che, mutuando le parole del pontefice, passano attraverso l'impegno delle donne. La donna, scrive il Papa, è colei che fa bello il mondo, che lo custodisce e mantiene in vita. Vi porta la grazia che fa nuove le cose, l'abbraccio che include, il coraggio di donarsi. Grazie e buon lavoro.
Thank you, Dr. Fumarola. Thank you so much. Indeed, it is a time for sowing. I'd like to turn and introduce Ms. Nandaya Benchika. Nandaya represents the International Fund for Agricultural Development as a lead technical specialist on gender and social inclusion. She brings 30 years of experience to this discussion in the areas of policy, rural development, and finance. She'll speak to the central role of women, as well as the necessary role of gender equality, the role of food and nutrition as a fundamental right. Nandaya, it's my pleasure. Please share with us.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. And I'm grateful for this opportunity. So good morning, good afternoon, and good evening for colleagues. I do represent in IFAD, and then for those of you who don't know, so IFAD is also the ACRE agency for the Food Systems Summit concerning the action track number 4 that looks at advancing equitable livelihoods in value distribution in the food systems. So we have 3 key messages for you. And the first one relates to the fact that women are central to sustainably improve the lives of their families and communities, and therefore must play a pivotal role in building the resilience of the community to climate change. Gender equality and women's empowerment are vital to meeting the challenges of improving food insecurity, nutrition, and enabling the poorer household to overcome poverty. Although women make up 43% of the agricultural labor force worldwide, despite this representation, women have fewer assets and less decision-making power than men. They lack access to finance and land, as well as agricultural resources, which leave them exposed to food insecurity, malnutrition, poverty, climate shocks, and a lot of variability. Evidence from a range of countries show that increasing the share of household income controlled by women, either through their own earnings or cash transfer, would change the spendings in ways that would benefit children as well as the entire family. In addition to all of this, women hold unique traditional knowledge, which often includes the stewardship of agrobiodiversity and neglected and utilized species, as well as household nutrition. In this context, women empowerment can contribute to community resilience and equitable intergenerational benefits, such as improved food security, household income, and resilience. So now women's empowerment is also key for social justice that is necessary, the necessary condition for food justice. In poor rural households, women bear a high workload of unpaid household labor and have little control over household income. Despite a key role in feeding her household, women often suffer worst from malnutrition, they eat last, and despite all of this, they also have some high level of nutrition requirements that are not met. At IFAD, we work on in a number of ways with varieties of partners to ensure that women, as well as other marginalized groups, are the key stakeholders in discussions and are also key participants in devising and implementing some important solutions. For instance, IFAD works with women to create local women's groups that provide greater agency for women. A second example, IFAD targets specific value chains opportunities for women, which often complement their traditional knowledge, as well as create some seed banks and cells for garden products. And the third example shows that IFAD also, through its projects, aim to remove the unique obstacles to accessible finance, as well as providing and leverage their own financing needs for the promotion of their own businesses. In addition to that, partnering with men is essential for gender equality and the empowerment of women. IFAD promotes a range of approaches, and in doing so is focusing on changing the gender dynamics between men and women. Most importantly, IFAD is a leader in the use of household methodology, such as gender action learning systems, or what we call the GALs, which address the gender inequalities at household level, resulting in more equitable distribution of unpaid household labor and greater control of household income, as well as household decision making. Empowerment in the household is an integral part to make the most out of the new opportunities outside of the household. It is a vital foundation towards securing three things: economic empowerment, decision-making representation, as well as equitable workload balance for rural women. And I would like to conclude with this third message. The lack of gender disaggregated data at national levels in policies as well as development put women at risk of being left behind. Across countries, many agricultural, forestry, natural resources management, as well as climate change and trade policies and investment do not include or provide gender equality and women's empowerment, despite the critical roles that women played across food systems as producers, processors, traders, and consumers. For instance, in Africa, despite substantial gender gap, regional and national agricultural investment plans insufficiently address gender inequalities and do not provide an enabling environment for women's empowerment in agri-food systems. A gender audit of 38 national agricultural investment plans show that rarely integrate a thorough gender analysis and do not always use sex disaggregated data. A review of climate change policies in Latin America countries also showed a lack of integration of gender in policies. And when gender was monitored, this was not carried throughout the action plans, and there were no budgets to actually implement the recommended policies. Integrated gender in food system policies will provide the legal framework for driving actions and allocating the requirement investments that do not only close the gender gap, but also address the underlying causes of gender inequality of women's empowerment in food systems. So in closing, we would recommend that countries need to outline the clear target for gender transformative activities, including the percentage of budget for those initiatives, which integrate collections of sex disaggregated data across the entire food system in the national statistics. And I will conclude with this. Over to you, Carrie.
Thank you so much, and I very much appreciate those comments, and focus on filling data gaps is always important. I'm going to pivot now to introducing panelists who offer a country level perspective and helping us connect that to this global conversation. I welcome today Ms. Romana Kach, who is representing ABSI Foundation. She's based in Kenya. We also have Ms. Betty Rose Abuti, who is Policy and Advocacy Specialist and National Coordinator with Caritas Uganda, as well as Ms. Musamba Mubanga, the Program Specialist in the area of livelihoods and climate change adaptation with Caritas Zambia. Each will share some perspective from their countries about women and food security and stories of success that help us understand the value of accompanying women, providing them access so they may chart their own course and guide us all toward food justice. Romana, we'll start with you.
So good afternoon. Thank you very much, Kerry. I am delighted to be part of this forum to discuss and bring stories of women to the international arena and to understand what really goes on down at the peripheries. So my name is Romana. I work for AFSI in Kenya as the country representative. So from AFSI, I'm delighted to say that we are pleased to share our experience of women who are supported, accompanied to do and to believe in themselves, to recognize and be aware of their own dignity. Starting from this point, they are able to become independent, to work, to support their children and families, and to activate that process of development for the whole community that they belong to. So our key point, my key point is to be the interest of the promotion of a single person within the community and connected to the family and also the wider community. So the stories I'm going to share with you is to demonstrate this value of women well supported, that when women are well supported, they can be able to foster, strengthen the link of the community to that of their engagement and actually to help their families put food on the table and be able to face problems that every day are not well faced, starting from the fact of food insecurity. So the first story is of a woman that lives in the slum of Kibera. She's Jacinta. She's a widow and a mother of three children. She's been living in Kibera for 20 years. And Jacinta was at the verge of losing her small business during the COVID pandemic. Thanks to the micro enterprises of AFSI, she was able to stay afloat and to save money, to reinvest, and be able to put food on the table and to be able to save something, and more importantly, to be able to pay rent. That is very important for the stability of the family. In her own words, Jacinta says, I feel really like crying because when I recall where I have come from and how my life has improved, just for this single fact of being helped to save and to reinvest, I can only say thank you for what you have done to me. And today, my children are not going to sleep hungry without food, or they are not being disturbed by the landlord because I'm able to pay the rent, and I feel human. The fact that I can be able to take care of my children on my own without asking anybody to help me. So those are the words of Jacinta that was helped by the women's micro enterprises that are being assisted by AFSI in the slum of Kibera. My second story is from Adelaide, that is a refugee woman living in Kenya. And Adelaide was really distraught when she arrived in Kenya because she had nowhere to stay, no friends, so she relied on well-wishers and neighbors to be able to be housed, to put food on the table for herself and a child. And as soon as, before 1 year was over, she lost the child that she had. And the situation really was more compromised. When she met the groups of AFSI micro enterprises, she was able to train in business, market-oriented skills, in particular on soap making. This enabled her slowly to start saving for a passion, for the passion that she has is in tailoring. So this micro enterprise, this market-oriented skill to make soap, enable her to sell the soap, to have a small possibility of renting her own room, and now to be able to save for the future. So two things has happened for her in the micro enterprise group. One, she was able to be accompanied through the psychosocial support that is given by our social worker and also by our field personnel. The second is that she saved the money to be able to put food on a table and also to save for the future in order to realize her dream and to regain back her dignity by doing for herself what she wanted to do all the life. So currently she lives we're paying her rent and putting food on the table while saving for a passion that is in tailoring. So the third story is of a young woman. She's called Mercy. Mercy was a recipient of education programs for AFSI. And after finishing high school, Mercy was able to go to college, and now currently she's the sales manager for for an insurance company. And the important bit is that this possibility for her to go to school, to do a credible course in college that help her find a job is what has really changed her stakes, in the sense that now she's married, she has 2 children. She's able to pay rent for herself. She's able to give food to her children and send them to the school of her choice. And more importantly, also, she has not forgotten where she came from. She has helped her mother to start a small business that is now helping also other siblings that from the household of Mercy. In her own words, Mercy says, my name is Mercy, AFSI alumni. I would really wish to thank you for having come to Kenya. I would say it was not very clear how my destiny was going to be until I met you. Thank you so much, and I wish you all the blessings from God and in future. I wish also to touch a child's heart as a way of appreciation of offering me education support. And thank you for the moral support and the friendliness and the spiritual support, and more so for connecting me with my destiny. This is in our own words and in our own writing. Mercy says this. I felt that this story was really very central, in the sense that now Mercy, being the manager for a company, is already in the line of leadership. She's able to make the decision for herself and for her children, and to show that the little that was put for her education has actually changed the stakes for this lady, and in future is going also to change the stakes for our children. So in conclusion, I want to say that these stories that I shared are not only for these 3 women. These are stories for all the members of the micro enterprises that we are supporting. That is more than 3,000. And indeed, to show that women, with the little that they are given, they can make extraordinary help for their families, extraordinary contribution to their families, to the communities, and to the ecosystem as a whole. Going forward, I'd like to suggest that there is need to support these works that help women to come on the table of decision, to be able to take care of themselves and to regain that dignity. So, and the last and not least is to say that these women micro-enterprises are not only business oriented, they are also support groups for women, because they talk about what's happening in their life. They share ideas, and they are there sharing what they have. So this also is an entry point to reach the communities that are hard to reach, especially in the rural areas, and to bring them on that table that they can speak, and tomorrow they are the leaders of their families, and also help the communities to grow. Thank you, Kate.
Thank you so much, Romana, for that, for words from Mercy and other amazing women. I think another point you're making is that every woman is an individual, and the needs that she needs are unique to her. And so blanket policy is difficult to apply to every person. Everyone has a unique and special need in their lives and where they are. So thank you for sharing that. We have 7 or 8 minutes to wrap up this section. So I'm going to turn it to Betty Rose next, and then Musamba will follow. Betty Rose, Caritas Uganda, please share with us your experience.
Thank you very much. Thank you for this opportunity to share Caritas Uganda experiences. Can I share my screen?
Yes, you should be able to.
Yes.
And just keep in mind, we have about 4 minutes for you.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm just going to be very fast. Can you see my screen?
Yes, there we are.
Yes, the role of women in Uganda. I just give a brief background that agriculture is the mainstay of Uganda's economy, and our population is over 40 million, and about 36 million live in the rural areas, and most of them depend on agriculture for the entire livelihood. 70% of women are employed under the agriculture sector. The role of women in Uganda: women are very key contributors to the integral human development in both economic and social. And also economically, we look at education. Women are the ones in Uganda responsible to educate their children. And they do that even to pay the school fees. And I must say that over 40% of education institutions are managed by women, and especially the nuns. The women also do the production, marketing, and productivity, and they do care for Mother Earth. What have we done as Caritas Uganda? So we have helped build the capacity of women farmers to advocate for their own rights openly. They can now write to the Speaker of Parliament, and they can be given space to air their views. The other thing that we have done as Caritas Uganda is to empower the small children, the little children in school, to empower them with the skills to conserve the environment. This picture is during the the International Earth Day. We have also worked with the schools to give them counseling and the senior women teachers so that they can support the school children. But you can see at the background, the children are seated on a bare floor. That can explain what happens during the learning process when they sit on a bare floor. Women also play a very key role in marketing, but the challenge here is the women do marketing and transporting the produce from their homes to the market, and moreover on their heads. And this is a challenge. And if only such women could be helped with other means of taking their produce to the market, it would be better. Caritas has also empowered the women to own their own livestock. We have also empowered women to conserve the environment by providing them with the energy saving stoves. Women are key in providing food for the family. And when you provide food for the family, you create peace and harmony, because an angry man is easily irritable. The challenge: inadequate access to production, climate crisis, inadequate knowledge, and market-oriented farming, lack of inclusive planning and implementation of programs. We also have, this is a very big one, and I must talk about this. During a study by Caritas Uganda and partners in 2019, it revealed that there are high levels of chemical residues in food, especially tomatoes and others. This is because the women do not have the skills to use the chemicals, but also because there is a belief that we need to go modern in agriculture. And at the end of the day, you find that women and everyone is eating poison. The other one is genetic engineering and the modern technologies that have really bogged down the women. So this engineering, in Uganda, we had a bill proposed by the parliament, but as Caritas Uganda, we struggled to make sure this bill was pro-women and pro-people. I must say, 3 parliaments, that is 15 years ago, on this bill passed. Recommendations: sensitization of all stakeholders, promotion of financial literacy, and a need to design women technologies, machinery to help them take their produce to the market, improve the extension, and then make women aware policies and programming in decision making, inclusive planning and the implementation of programs, promotion of women-friendly farming systems like agroecology, and then we improve access to development inputs like credit, information, and mechanization. I want to thank you so much.
Thank you, Betty Rose. Musamba, we have about 3 minutes. We would love to hear your perspective from Zambia, please.
Okay, thank you so much, Kerry. So I think I share similar sentiments with what Betty just from sharing, but I'll just maybe speak to a few that maybe she has not picked on. So Betty, I'll just ask that you move the slides quickly for me. since you're sharing the screen. Okay, okay, let me just speak from here. Okay, so just to share, in Zambia, we have about 17.8 million in terms of population, and of this, we have about 53% that are women. And agriculture contributes highly to the GDP of about 20% and also contributes 12% to the national export earnings. And the sector employs nearly 70% of the labor force and remains the main source of income, especially for women. And also, it's a major source of both income and employment for those people that are living in the rural areas. And in terms of sharing some of the concerns around the agriculture and food security, in Zambia, the agriculture sector, as well as the food processing industry, has been contributing a lot to environmental degradation. So this is more of producing greenhouse gases and also the use of pesticide, which have degraded the environment. And prior to COVID-19 in Zambia, we had over 23% million that were estimated to be facing severe acute food security. And though no assessment has been done since COVID-19, but there's a likelihood that these numbers have really gone up in terms of the fact that there's been impact of food availability as a result of the pandemic. Then in terms of sharing some of the current concerns, this one speaks to unsustainable agricultural practices, which border on the use of chemicals, which have had great impact on the health of people and also to the entire food chain as a whole. Then also the other aspect is the unsustainable farmer input and output subsidies, which are heavily impacting on the vulnerability of women. As it is, there is need to address the major inefficiencies in the way food systems are currently being financed. Because what we are seeing with the food system is that the sustainable farming practices that contribute to positive outcomes for environmental management are not really funded. And this has a great barrier on the performance of a woman. Then also the other concern is around the seed sector, which mostly has been politicized, and there's limited focus on the farmers' rights and also seed sovereignty, because farmers actually are not able to actually define what they want around the seed sector. In Africa, and particularly in Zambia, women attach so much value to the seed sector. And what we're seeing is that the seed sector actually is being taken or being monopolized by the multinational company, hence losing the value that women attach to this. And also food crisis is a justice issue, which is at the heart of every woman. And just to speak to what is happening around the attainment of integral human development, what we are seeing is that most of the current policies and development programs that are happening at the moment are not taking into account a holistic type of development, but they're more political centered, and thereby making a woman more vulnerable. And if you look at the fact that there's a relationship between environment, society, and also an individual, but then what we're seeing is that there's that disjointedness in terms of appreciating that the three aspects are actually interrelated. And in terms of the key recommendations, which maybe I just want to speak to, is seeing on how best we can ensure that agroecological practices are actually taken on board, because we believe that if we are going to ensure that we protect Mother Earth, I think the pandemic has brought with it so many lessons in terms of seeing the fact that you cannot address one problem at a whole. And if we're looking at addressing poverty, I think there are a number of dimensions that are found in society which also needs to be embraced. And one of them is the vulnerability of a woman. And the other recommendation borders on the need for actions to be directed at the food system level to make it more nutrition sensitive. We are speaking of the high levels of malnutrition in Africa, but I'm guessing if we're going to address malnutrition, it has to start with having nutritious food, which will start from making sure that the pregnant woman actually feeds on the right food. Then in terms of my last words in my concluding remarks, I just want to maybe ask ourselves or the question that what kind of a food system do we want? I'm guessing from the Africa side, what we want is a food system that pushes for adoption of agroecology principles that guarantees resilience. So in this case, embracing the vulnerability that a woman has. A type of food system that looks at soil health, seed and food sovereignty, respect for the farmers' rights, and also addresses household food and nutrition security while leaving no woman behind. What we have seen in the past is that there's been a lot of technologies, research and development that has arisen as a result of poverty and also the fact that we are under attack with climate change. But there is need to ensure that in whatever technology that is being developed, it does not leave out a woman who's more vulnerable. And just to quote some of the words that Pope Francis says in his encyclical, let us see, is that whenever food is thrown out, it is as if it were stolen from the table of the poor. And this is a strong statement in my view, which I think speaks to the importance of the entire food chain. And if you're going to really ensure that we have a sustainable food system in place or food chain, it's important to actually ensure that the contribution that a woman makes is greatly appreciated. Thank you.
Musamba, thank you so much for that. Romana, Betty Rose, Musamba, thank you for bringing the perspective of your home place and the powerful role that women play, and particularly for making that link with climate change and environment and lack of connection there by policies and funding too often. Thank you so much for that. And for challenging us, what kind of food system do we want? And that is the opportunity among the disruption of COVID-19 and the pandemic. It does show us that bold change is possible and quickly if we put our minds to it. So my thanks to each of you, Daniela, Ndaya, Romana, Betty Rose, and Musamba, for sharing your wisdom and helping us better understand the vulnerabilities of women to food insecurity and the unique value they bring. You spoke especially to the importance of gender equality and agency in transforming food systems. I am going to ask for just a quick closing comment from Daniela and Ndaya, particularly as it relates to the fact that this is about elevating the role of women in advance of the UN Food Summit in September and the pre-summit in Rome. And just to say that women and food justice have been on the agenda for decades, and yet we sense change is slow. So with that summit in mind, Ndaya and Daniela, if you would please both offer just 1 or 2 minutes of closing remarks of what you would like this audience to take away as we're thinking about disrupting the debate at the UN Food Summit later this year. Ndaya, I'll turn it to you first, and we'll close with Daniela.
Thank you so much, Carrie, for this opportunity. So as we have seen through the various contributions, the contribution of women is not unknown. So it is something that is well known by everyone. So what is important is not so much to only talk about women, but also to have women fully represented at all the different levels of decision-making throughout the food system summit. So it's important, whether it's at the community level, at the national level, regional level, or the global level, to have women properly represented so then they can voice their concerns, but also relay the concern of their constituency. The second element that is also key is to ensure that there is data to actually monitor and track the results. So as I was ending my intervention, I did raise the importance of having sex disaggregated data. Whatever is not measured doesn't matter. So measuring the contribution of women, the role of the importance, and attaching budgets to that is also key in order to move forward gender equality and women's empowerment in food systems. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Ndaya. Daniela, please.
Sì, io come credo insomma siamo d'accordo tutte su questo aspetto. La questione delle donne è trasversale in ogni ambito del quale noi ci occupiamo, in ogni ambito della nostra vita, per cui penso che bisogna continuare ad agire su un aspetto prettamente culturale, far comprendere a chi magari ancora non lo ha compreso il valore delle donne e dobbiamo parlare agli uomini delle donne, perché guai a ragionare delle questioni di genere soltanto tra di noi. È importante che gli uomini acquisiscano la consapevolezza e la certezza che il lavoro delle donne, il valore delle donne, ci dicono anche stime qui in Italia, può addirittura aumentare di gran lunga il PIL del paese, ma questo io penso che valga in maniera trasversale. E poi noi abbiamo, come si diceva prima, questa grande opportunità che ci viene da una situazione così tragica come quella del Covid, ovvero quello di utilizzare le risorse che ci vengono messe a disposizione dalla comunità europea e almeno noi in Italia sentiamo dire al Premier Draghi che bisogna assolutamente coinvolgere donne e giovani anche attraverso interventi mirati. Ecco, noi dobbiamo stare attenti in questa fase a non abbassare la guardia e approfittare per cercare di raddrizzare quelle storture che oggi purtroppo esistono nel lavoro ma anche nella società. Grazie.
Thank you very much. It is with sincere gratitude and humble thanks to all of our guests today for being here today, for sharing your perspective, and for kicking off a really, really important conversation. Thank you so much. And I turn it over to, I'm not sure, I think we're going into a break briefly. So we'll break for a couple moments, and then I believe we'll turn it over to Chiara Martinelli, who will take us through the next session. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful day.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I think we can continue now with our next session, and probably we can stop sharing the screen. Here we go. Okay, welcome everyone again, also from my side. I'm Chiara Martinelli, and I'm very honored to be accompanying you all in our next session. Just a reminder for some of you who might have just joined. We are in our first webinar on food justice, food for all, in view of the UN Food Systems Summit this year, convened by the United Nations. And this session is going to focus on food and peace. We heard from the beginning of this afternoon, thanks to the intro remarks and the input from some of our colleagues, that improving food security is a key building block for peacekeeping and peace building. And also we often say and we often read that food insecurity is both a cause and a consequence of conflict. But today we wanted to try to put this sentence in the other way around. Food justice is a route for peace. Food justice is fundamental to build peace and a culture of peace. And women leadership is a crucial contribution to make that happen. So that is what we are going to try to discuss in our next session. And also we, as Kerry just said in concluding the previous session, we see really like this is a key momentum with the learning of the pandemic and this UN Food Systems Summit coming up to highlight some of the main aspects and the main elements that can help us to make a clear contribution on that topic. So I'm very honored and humbled to be together with 4 distinguished speakers today. So for the sake of time, I'm going to introduce them all here at the beginning so that we can engage in a discussion together with them. So first of all, Professoressa Daniela Ropelato. She's the director of the doctoral school of the Sofia University Institute. Then will be the turn of Dr. Lola Castro, regional director for Southern Africa of the World Food Programme. Dr. Gabriella Arrigo, Head of International Relations at the Italian Space Agency, and Ms. Susie Schneider, from the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons. So as you can see, only from the title, I got a little bit scared how now competent, how much experience and expertise these women have on these topics. So I hope you are as eager as I am to listen from them. So we will have around as before, like with a short input from each of them, and then we will have together a little bit of interaction. So I hand over to you, Daniela, to help us to kick off and start this session, please.
Grazie a te Chiara e buongiorno a tutte. Allora, tocca a me dire qualcosa sulla relazione donne e politica nel contesto della promozione della pace, come dicevamo. E vorrei ringraziare le colleghe del primo panel perché mi sembra che sia stato fondamentale il contributo che ci hanno dato e su cui andiamo a costruire, ad aggiungere qualcosa in più. Si tratta di idee, non si tratta di argomentare, no? Di costruire degli argomenti, però certamente quello che conta poi è il quadro che si compone con le diverse prospettive. Io punto su questo. Ecco, segnalerò anzitutto un quadro, una visione generale di riferimento che a mio parere oggi costituisce una vera agenda etica globale per dare coerenza alle nostre riflessioni, la cultura della cura. E poi vorrei suggerire in conclusione una grande attenzione per un'alleanza strategica, diciamo così. Allora, una prima osservazione. La nostra analisi oggi è evidentemente un tipo di analisi tecnica molto specialistica, però ho avvertito l'esigenza di collocare le domande che ci stiamo ponendo in una visione appunto più ampia, più generale. E prima di tutto perciò di riconoscere riconoscere lo intendo nel senso di togliere dall'invisibilità, riconoscere la presenza e il lavoro delle donne nei processi decisionali in questi ambiti, negli ambiti appunto del food system, del global food system. A mio parere c'è qualcosa di più che semplicemente un tema di leadership femminile, pur con tutti i problemi e la rilevanza di questo grosso argomento, che è quello appunto della difficoltà di dare visibilità politica e rappresentanza alle donne. Però si tratta appunto di guardare alla presenza e al lavoro delle donne nell'ambito più generale, dove loro sono, a costruire processi dentro i sistemi di alimentazione. E abbiamo sentito nel primo panel numeri, dati importanti, abbiamo anche sentito dire che mancano numeri, dati significativi che ci aiutino a crescere in questa valutazione, in questa osservazione. Però in ogni caso che le donne siano nel contesto urbano e in quello rurale produttrici di valore, soggetti centrali nelle catene dei sistemi alimentari è assodato. Quello che dobbiamo comprendere di più è appunto come far acquistare loro quella forza che in genere fanno fatica a vedere riconosciuta dentro i processi decisionali. A me capita di rendermene conto a lezione, in aula, con gli studenti e le studentesse, e con tante conferme, perché sono più spesso le ragazze, le donne e quante religiose che ci incantano, lasciatemi usare una parola luminosa, con il racconto delle loro avventure imprenditoriali a tutte le latitudini in questo settore, nel settore appunto del food. Esperienze con valore umano, con incidenza economica e politica, però qui, ecco, qui vorrei fare un passaggio di livello. Vorrei sottolineare che tutto ciò può essere letto alla luce di un paradigma di azione caratteristico, appunto, la cultura della cura. Una cultura che è la più vissuta nel percorso dell'umanità e nello stesso tempo la meno studiata, e che solo in questi ultimi anni ha cominciato ad emergere dalla nebbia dei secoli, diciamo così, appunto nelle scienze sociali. Eppure nei processi di produzione alimentare, nella loro organizzazione, quando andiamo a studiare ciò che orienta l'impegno delle donne, riconosciamo una modalità di governo delle cose e un approccio conoscitivo alle cose e al mondo che ha la dignità, attraverso l'azione delle donne, di un vero e proprio paradigma, appunto la cura. Allora, vabbè, non abbiamo il tempo di andare nei dettagli, io nomino Elena Pulcini, questa filosofa sociale che fra il resto ci ha lasciato poco tempo fa per il Covid dell'Università di Firenze, che tanto ha contribuito alla chiarificazione del concetto di cura, studiando l'identità femminile. Ecco, a Elena Pulcini dobbiamo riconoscere il valore di averci condotto a comprendere la responsabilità intergenerazionale, tra il resto, proprio perché studiando il profilo delle donne abbiamo compreso sempre di più che la responsabilità non si rivolge al vicino ma anche al lontano, anche all'estraneo. E poi lasciatemi ricordare Jennifer Nedelski, altro ambito di riferimento culturale, una filosofa canadese che da anni invita a cercare una nuova fioritura umana coniugando cura, lavoro e organizzazione sociale, proprio perché la cura è sempre, nei secoli, no, è sempre stata affidata alla gratuità del servizio femminile, mentre agli uomini veniva chiesta la produzione di reddito. E Nedelski propone un pensiero coraggioso e ci dice appunto che ripensando attraverso la condivisione maschile e femminile i servizi di cura, non sarà che per questa strada riusciamo a riorganizzare per intero il sistema anche sociale e politico, e questa è una bella sfida. Bene, non ci siamo allontanati dalla politica, siamo sempre nell'ambito della politica, perché se la politica diventa cura, da competizione, da distribuzione di segmenti di potere, diventa connessione delle funzioni sociali, diventa costruzione di comunità, diventa orientamento al bene comune. Questo anche nei sistemi di produzione alimentare. E sappiamo che il contributo femminile, che appunto ci dà gli occhi per leggere attraverso il paradigma della cura queste funzioni, è anche un contributo che ha preso sulle sue spalle la fatica, il peso di queste operazioni, di questi processi nella vita delle famiglie e delle comunità, degli uomini e delle donne, dei bambini e degli anziani, dei sani e dei malati. Per questo abbiamo la forza di chiedere con urgenza che la voce delle donne debba essere riconosciuta e amplificata. Lascerei perdere altre osservazioni che sarebbero molto interessanti riguardo alla cura, no? E come si traduce poi dal punto di vista della categoria, per dire solo un punto che mi sta a cuore. Perché è importante mettere a fuoco in qualche modo un pensiero paradigmatico per togliere frammentarietà alla nostra analisi, per capire che attraverso una lettura complessa come questa, attraverso un punto di riferimento, un punto di osservazione, si produce pensiero. Se produciamo pensiero, produciamo anche realtà. È una sfida da cogliere, perché attraverso un punto di osservazione forse riusciremo davvero a cambiare qualcosa. In fondo è la strada che mi sembra sta seguendo anche Papa Francesco, Papa Bergoglio, perché ormai non sfugge a nessuno quante volte anche Papa Francesco parli di cura, usi questo linguaggio, per esempio nel messaggio per la 54esima giornata della pace dell'1 gennaio scorso. E chiudo con una sfida, Chiara, una sfida che è quella all'alleanza, è una parola che abbiamo già sentito oggi, per quello mi limito anch'io a sottolinearla e a farla mia, l'alleanza appunto della complementarietà fra il maschile e il femminile, che è appunto tipicamente un'alleanza politica, strategica. Abbiamo parlato di alleanza tra generazioni, ecco, in questo ambito è più che mai risolutiva per costruire quella pace che abbiamo messo a titolo del nostro panel. Ecco, questa alleanza strategica fra il maschile e il femminile che è il motore di questi processi di innovazione. Grazie.
Thanks a lot, Daniela, because I think that gave really us a frame to handle this difficult discussion on food and peace. So I think without waiting any second, I hand over to Lola Castro from the World Food Programme to help us understanding a little bit more the situation in regards also to food insecurity in the world.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chiara, and a pleasure to be with you today. Thank you for the invitation. And as you all know, for the World Food Programme, gender equality is a must for a world of zero hunger. And all women, men, girls, and boys can exercise their human rights. And we know one of the most important human rights is the right to adequate food. And this is where we really want to talk today. And I would like to focus a little bit on food and conflict and food and crisis, so as to follow the discussion. The previous speakers have talked a lot, and apologies if I will repeat a couple of ideas, but I will try to contribute and add something. As World Food Programme, wherever we work, be in the big emergencies, saving lives, as you see in the big Yemen, Sudan's, or DRC, or basically when we work on resilience and developing, changing lives as well, we aim to tackle the inequalities that basically discriminate against women and girls. And we work that by ensuring the participation and inclusion of women and girls in all the activities. And especially, we try to promote equity and empowerment, and this we do particularly in humanitarian crisis and also in the countries affected by conflict, where food insecurity and malnutrition are obviously exacerbated. I think all of you know very well that conflict is the single biggest driver of hunger in the world today. And that has been said already. The numbers are not looking better, and the famines that are now in the world are mostly driven by conflict. And there is where we as international community, as the countries, as the civil society, as the people of these countries and the populations, we need to work together. And we have the advantage that at least 3 years ago, the Security Council of the United Nations passed a historic resolution which acknowledged the link between hunger and conflict. And this was the very well-known resolution 2417, and recognizes that humankind will never eliminate hunger without establishing peace in the world. And this is, I think, very much linked to the idea of the discussion today. I want to mention a couple of ideas on what we see as World Food Program all over the world. I'm now in Johannesburg, Southern Africa, and in this region, we see that despite the women are very much empowered in many areas, and they have important roles for the food security of the family, they often face very strong discriminations. And this discrimination, in fact, is exacerbated during conflict, natural, and health shocks. And in this region, we have, if you want, this year we call it the 3 Cs: the conflicts, the COVID, and the climate change, which are the big shocks that affect the situation. And all those shocks are causing mass displacement, deep economic crisis. They have created inflation unknown before in this region. The unemployment levels are very high. They have reduced the fiscal space and social protection and health services the government can give to the people. They have made the basic needs, including the food, less available and accessible for all. And as we all know, women are often the ones who worry about not having enough food to feed their families. And when you talk to women all around the region, one of the things they talk to you is that they need peace to be able to be food secure. And I will mention field trips that I've done recently to Cabo Delgado in northern Mozambique, where the women, around 750,000 people, have been displaced due to conflict. And really, when you talk to the women what they need, they don't tell you they need big houses or big things. They need only peace. They need to be able to feed their children, to be able for their children to go to school, to have a house, and to have the basic minimum standards to have a normal life. Really very important to deal with this situation with a gender-sensitive lens and really look what the women need in the conflict and how we can provide them reassurances. And especially when we know when the crisis starts and strikes, the inequalities become further exacerbated, and we have very long-term effects. We don't have, out of a conflict, we don't have the short-term effects, which are the displacement, the hunger, etc. But we have long-term effects, like can be the loss of agricultural assets, the loss of the inability to farm, the inability to use infrastructure that has been destroyed by the conflict, the markets are destroyed. And what is most important, what we see in Southern Africa, is the long-term effect of conflict in malnutrition, chronic malnutrition and acute malnutrition. And the very high levels of chronic malnutrition we have in this region are basically brought both by conflict and climate change equally. And the long life impact of malnutrition that goes beyond the duration of the violence itself, and is especially harmful for not only for women, but also for children. As we know, the children from the gestation period till the 1,000 days of life, they are very vulnerable to the chronic undernutrition, and we have to solve that issue now to ensure that we have an adequate workforce, an adequate student force, and everybody can have adequate means of living and with a well-nourished population in the countries. So basically, if we want, what do we need to do and how we can ensure that women are not only seen as victims of the conflict, but more like agents of change? What do we need to change ourselves as international community, as NGOs, as humanitarian workers? And what we come out is with 3-4 things that are very relevant. One is ensuring that women are included in the prevention and response strategies, and they can play an active role towards sustainable peace from the beginning, not at the end, not when everything went wrong and when we cannot solve, but prevention and response strategies. And a good start will be to engage with women at the very beginning of the peace processes, not just to wait till the post-conflict. Also, we have seen, and we have heard from other participants, how studies have shown that gender mainstreaming can only be effective when accompanied by strong empowerment structures. And so we need to continue working, as many of our colleagues discussed, with empowering women in the public sphere, in the human development priorities, etc. And to end, I think that inclusion does not mean only promoting women's participation in formal settings, but also recognizing that they have an impact also in the informal settings, through informal structures, in the family, in the communities, and they should not be unrecognized but recognized. So basically, and just to end, I think for successfully achieving the objective of eradicating hunger, and in order to attain food security and sustainable food systems, and SDG 2, as we said at the beginning, is extremely important that we all engage the women in the communities, we all work together, and working together will ensure that food security will be there and the reduction of conflict will be there. So let me leave it there, Chiara, and I know we're pressed on time, so we can talk later. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Lola, also for respecting the timing. You are doing great, all of you. I really appreciate your last part. I think we have all to learn to not speak about women leadership only when it comes to naming and mentioning the most impacted parts of the world, but also as agents of change and the contribution that we can bring in building the resilient food systems for the future. So I think that is something we will definitely take on with us in our future work. And also, I think it's a nice way to put the 3 C's, conflicts, COVID, and climate change being at the moment the shocks that have the biggest impact on food insecurity in the world. So I think this is showing us also that it's a systemic issue, so that we need to look at the problem from different perspectives. And that's why I'm very happy and honored to have our next speaker, that she's going to bring I would say maybe an unusual perspective for some of us, at least for myself, and how also people working in the space can help us to continue this reflection on building sustainable food systems. So I hand over to Dr. Gabriella Arrigo.
Grazie Chiara, buon pomeriggio e buongiorno a tutte e a tutti. In qualche modo io stessa sono una testimone della diplomazia spaziale nella comunità spaziale internazionale. E, nel mio ruolo sia come direttore degli affari internazionali presso l'Agenzia Spaziale Italiana che come docente di istituzioni e politiche spaziali. E, nel mio intervento brevemente proverò ad introdurvi alle tecnologie spaziali e allo spazio, cioè come le tecnologie spaziali possono in qualche modo aiutare o comunque contribuire allo sviluppo sostenibile e in particolare al raggiungimento degli obiettivi dell'Agenda 2030 delle Nazioni Unite, ma allo stesso tempo anche come la diplomazia spaziale può sostenere e supportare questo processo. Allora, anzitutto, così, per iniziare, per chi appunto non è dentro lo spazio, la prima domanda è: ma perché lo spazio? Beh, oggi volevo dirvi solo due dimensioni che forse ci possono aiutare in questo senso. La dimensione che forse un po' tutti conosciamo, quella forse più utopica, lo spazio che ci porta allo spazio dell'esplorazione, cioè l'osservare lo spazio profondo, l'osservare l'universo, andare oltre i limiti conosciuti, e poi invece lo spazio che ci fa osservare la Terra, che ci fa osservare la Terra dai satelliti, la nostra Terra appunto, come altri hanno detto prima di me, la casa comune. In questo senso, quindi lo spazio per tutti, quindi il contributo al raggiungimento degli obiettivi dello sviluppo sostenibile. Un flash solo sull'esplorazione, sicuramente tanti di voi hanno avuto modo di sentir parlare, ormai sono 20 anni che è operativa la Stazione Spaziale internazionale. Beh, questo sicuramente è un grande esempio di diplomazia spaziale, la più grande cooperazione spaziale internazionale raggiunta fino ad oggi. Nel 1988 è stato sottoscritto il primo accordo intergovernativo tra gli Stati Uniti, il Canada, il Giappone e i paesi europei. Nel 1993 poi la Federazione Russa, dopo il crollo dei due blocchi, è entrata a far parte della Stazione Spaziale Internazionale, e nel 1993 sono stati lanciati i primi due moduli pressurizzati, quello russo Zarya e quello americano Unity. Ma che cos'è la Stazione Spaziale Internazionale? È un complesso modulare di laboratori pressurizzati e di piattaforme esterne che ci fanno appunto osservare la Terra da una parte o l'universo dall'altra. Orbita a 400 km di distanza dalla Terra, è grande quanto un campo sportivo, e dentro sono stati portati fino ad oggi circa 2800 esperimenti in assenza di microgravità. Sono stati a bordo della stazione 230 astronauti di differenti nazionalità, sono stati coinvolti 18 paesi, e tutto questo in qualche modo non solo è stato un esempio di collaborazione internazionale, ma tutti gli esperimenti si fanno a beneficio dell'umanità. Ma andiamo ancora un po' più dentro. Le tecnologie spaziali, che cosa significa concretamente? Cioè l'utilizzo dei dati satellitari che tutti noi ormai utilizziamo nella vita quotidiana, dati di osservazione della Terra, dati di telecomunicazione, dati di navigazione e posizionamento. Per che cosa? Per appunto il raggiungimento degli obiettivi di sviluppo sostenibile, quindi utilizzati per l'agricoltura, per la salute, per l'ambiente, per i disastri naturali, per la formazione, per l'urbanizzazione, per la ricerca, per i trasporti, per la comunicazione, per l'assistenza umanitaria, per la sicurezza e quindi anche per la pace. Ma ancora più in dettaglio, che cos'è l'osservazione della Terra e perché può servire alla sicurezza alimentare? Beh, allora, l'osservazione della Terra o telerilevamento, il remote sensing in inglese, è la disciplina che permette di ricavare informazioni qualitative e quantitative sull'ambiente e sulla Terra tramite i sensori che sono a bordo dei satelliti di varia natura, sensori radar, ottici, per spettrali. Dallo spazio possiamo monitorare l'agricoltura, la vegetazione, possiamo controllare, prevenire e mitigare gli effetti addirittura delle carestie. La tecnologia spaziale, con la dovuta formazione, è preziosa per gli agricoltori, per gli agronomi, per i produttori di alimenti e per ovviamente i responsabili delle politiche agricole, che vogliono da una parte migliorare la produzione, ma allo stesso tempo anche la redditività. I satelliti di osservazione forniscono importanti informazioni per il monitoraggio del suolo, della copertura nevosa, per esempio, della siccità o dell'umidità, dello sviluppo delle differenti colture. Vedete in questa slide addirittura vediamo proprio da satellite le immagini su diversi territori. E dunque dallo spazio possiamo addirittura misurare il livello della povertà sulla Terra e dunque in qualche modo contribuire al raggiungimento del goal numero 2, e cioè porre fine alla fame, raggiungere la sicurezza alimentare, migliorare la nutrizione e promuovere un'agricoltura sostenibile. Ma che cos'è in particolare allora la diplomazia spaziale, che come vi dicevo prima un po' è il mio mestiere? Dal mio punto di vista, dalla mia esperienza, è uno strumento per iniziare o mantenere vivo il dialogo con tutti i paesi. che stanno usando o useranno le tecnologie spaziali per affrontare le grandi sfide umane e al contempo costruire partenariati solidi e in qualche modo funzionali. Forse pochi di voi sanno che oggi quasi 80 paesi conducono attività nello spazio, 82 paesi hanno almeno un satellite. L'anno scorso, nel 2020, l'economia spaziale globale è stata stimata in 385 miliardi di dollari, una cifra enorme. 95 paesi sono membri del Comitato Spaziale per l'uso pacifico dello spazio delle Nazioni Unite e 111 paesi hanno sottoscritto il Trattato dello Spazio, un trattato, quello del 1967, molto importante, che sancisce il principio dell'uso pacifico dello spazio, che stabilisce il divieto di collocare armi di distruzione di massa nello spazio, che vieta di condurre attività militari nello spazio e proibisce la rivendicazione di risorse poste nello spazio, incluse la Luna e gli altri corpi celesti. Bene, la diplomazia spaziale vuole in qualche modo operare per la sostenibilità e l'inclusione delle diversità. Qui vedete solo delle fotografie in cui mi vedete, forse in varie parti del mondo, sono veramente nei 6 continenti, Africa, America Latina, Asia, paesi arabi, Medio Oriente, che in questi giorni ci sta facendo un po' penare.
Gabriella, se puoi provare a concludere.
A chiudere, sì. Uno degli strumenti, volevo dire questo, importante della diplomazia spaziale sono i progetti di capacity building, i progetti di formazione. Con l'Agenzia Spaziale Italiana ne abbiamo realizzati tanti e continuiamo a farli nelle varie regioni del mondo, anche qui vedete le varie regioni. Un altro flash a proposito di diversità sono le diverse abilità. Vedete qui addirittura persone con abilità diverse che noi portiamo nello spazio in assenza di gravità. L'Agenzia Spaziale Europea ha recentemente lanciato un bando per selezionare nuovi astronauti, tra cui persone disabili. E infine non posso che terminare con donne, le donne importanti che hanno fatto la storia dello spazio internazionale, a cominciare dalla Valentina Tershkova, che nel 63 la prima sovietica è andata nello spazio, nell'83 la Sally Ride americana, che è andata anche lei nello spazio, e poi alcuni anni dopo, nell'86, è morta nell'incidente dello Shuttle Challenger, e poi la Mae Jemison nel 92, la prima afroamericana salita a bordo della Stazione Spaziale Internazionale, la prima cinese nel 2012, Yuan, e nel 2016 le 2 donne, Jessica Meyer e Cristina Koch, che hanno fatto al femminile la prima passeggiata fuori della Stazione Spaziale Internazionale. E quindi concludo con questa bella foto dallo spazio sul nostro pianeta. Vi ringrazio e vi vorrei portare la prossima volta in una prossima puntata dello spazio, in una prossima missione a bordo della Stazione Spaziale Internazionale. Grazie.
Grazie Gabriella, e torneremo anche verso di te con un paio di domande, quindi non abbiamo ancora il tempo di continuare. I keep to the English as promised to the interpreters. So thanks Gabriella, and I think this was already offering us a very concrete example on how we really need everyone. Like this point, I think, of inclusiveness and of the importance of each actors to be actively involved in building sustainable food systems. I think it's an important message we wanted to carry out of this webinar. So we want to now pass on to Ms. Susie Schneider. As I introduced her at the beginning, Susie, she's from the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons. And I hand over to you to continue showing us how how concrete we can be in building food security for all.
Thank you so much. It's a great pleasure and an honor to be with everyone here today. And you may think it's a bit unusual for someone who works to eliminate the threat of nuclear weapons to engage in this very important discussion about women and about food security. But bear with me as I just explain a little bit on why this connection is so important and so relevant. First, why nuclear weapons and food? Nuclear weapons, we all know, they're the most destructive, inhumane, and indiscriminate weapon ever created. And the use of tens or hundreds of nuclear bombs would disrupt the global climate, and that would cause widespread famine. A regional nuclear war involving as few as 100 Hiroshima-sized weapons would disrupt the climate so badly, more than 2 billion people would be at risk for famine. And that's less than 1% of the nuclear weapons on the planet right now. So it's an urgent issue to address both this and to address nuclear weapons in the context of food security, in the context of preventing food scarcity. And then, of course, the question, why women? Why does somebody who works on nuclear weapons think so much about women? Not just because I am a woman, although there is that, but also because the use or testing of nuclear weapons has a disproportionate harm on women and girls. And what we have seen from evidence, from research, is that women in Hiroshima and Nagasaki had nearly double the risk of developing and dying from solid cancers due to exposure to ionizing radiation from those nuclear bombs. Research from Chernobyl shows that girls are considerably more likely to develop thyroid cancer than boys. And pregnant women exposed to nuclear radiation face a greater likelihood of delivering children with physical malformations and stillbirths, and that increases maternal mortality. And yet, most of the time in policy setting, official evaluations, official policies have not considered gender and age-sensitive impacts. So that means that the harm of ionizing radiation has been systematically underestimated and underreported. And it's been said already today, and I'll say it again, gender disaggregated data is necessary to make effective policy. Also, despite these disproportionate impacts, women are extremely underrepresented in decision-making regarding nuclear weapons. At any given meeting of international diplomatic meeting on nuclear weapons, it's maybe 20 to 25% of official country delegations are women. And less than a fifth, so even less than that, of statements are likely to be given by women. About half of delegations are composed entirely of men. So it's really relevant to consider data, to consider decision-making, to consider where's women's participation when we look at dealing with issues of existential crisis and existential threat. There's also another piece of this that doesn't get talked about quite as much, but it's relevant for our conversation is how the discourse is often highly, highly gendered. And we see this when we see the discourse on food security. I have heard things, and maybe it's not my everyday work. Maybe others don't hear this as often as I have, because you see more of it. But I see things like it's a woman's job to provide the food and to provide the food security. That's very gendered. It's not putting the responsibility for an entire community on the members of the community equally. There's no equity there. When it comes to issues of war and peace and conflict, we see that being ready to use weapons is masculine and strong, while wanting to disarm, to cooperate, or negotiate is often described as feminine and weak. And that is problematic because it means that we're not coming to the table as equals with valid perspectives to bring. Now, I was heavily involved in the negotiation around the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, and that only happened because of addressing some of these underlying causes. So we had to change the discourse to redefine security and move away from very traditional concepts of state security, and instead look at the impact of a weapon on communities and focus on prevention, not deterrence. And just that simple word, change, helped us change the dynamic in the discussion. Not just that, but when it came to participation, there was a very concentrated effort. The negotiations of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons featured female leaders. Many of the most active delegations were led by women. Ireland, New Zealand, the Philippines, South Africa, Sweden, Switzerland, Thailand. The negotiating conference president was a woman. And civil society organizations were also, many of the very active civil society organizations, including my own, were led by women. Now, that's not saying that when you add women to the conversation, everything changes, but it does help ask the question, if we want to create change, to create safety and sustainability, we have to ask, how are people granted access to or kept from power, from decision-making? And we need to talk about how does adding a balance, an equitable representative balance of people in the conversation change our understanding of what we're talking about. In the previous session, one of the speakers talked about micro-enterprise, not just as a way to build economy, but also community, safety, security. And that's really important because society cannot sustain itself in a world in which women are seen but not heard. And women's perspectives and participation is integral to finding solutions to the worst challenges we're coming up against. So just to really put it, these lessons, I mean, it's really important. We have to think about protection, protecting the vulnerable in our society, in our communities, protecting the stories of what has happened. And that includes things like making sure gender disaggregated data is gathered on the impact of policies, protecting our tale, our role. If we don't know, we can't protect. We have to prevent. And that means identifying and raising alarms about problems before they become catastrophe. In the women, peace and security field, it's women's organizations that often raise the red flag saying there's going to be a conflict here. Something is about to happen. We have a problem. And in order to prevent that problem from becoming worse, we need to listen. And that's my last point, participation. There is nothing about us without us. And that applies to all of the traditionally disempowered parts of society, including women. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Susie. Again, I think this is the point of participation, inclusiveness, everyone counts is extremely important. And I think some of us involved also in the process of the UN Food System Summit preparation, we really see how it's important to raise that voice when it comes especially to the most excluded parts of the world. So now I hope you all agree with me that it's time also to hear a little bit what you as participants also think. So don't hesitate to use the Q&A box if you wanted to put some questions forward or some comments. Of course, we will not be able to answer all of them, but we can definitely take those into account also in our work in the follow-up of this webinar. That as Vincenzo mentioned at the beginning of this afternoon, is only the first one of a series of 3 that we are having on this topic. So please don't hesitate to use those tools to make your voice heard. And I have a couple of questions to our speakers. And since they were great and sticking to the time, I'm sure they will continue to do so, because now you will have even less time to answer to my question. And I will go a little bit in a different order, but within the attempt to zoom into food systems and and peace and conflict and the culture of care we heard from Daniela, like how we can shape and we can extrapolate some ideas or some elements that could help us to define, to speak about the role of women in shaping sustainable food system. So I start with Gabriella with a very short, I mean, if you can tell a little bit more, like in a couple of minutes, about what do you think is the special contribution of women to the achievement of the SDGs, in particular from your perspective, as you said, as a diplomat and as an actor of dialogue in your work environment.
Ok, so dal mio punto di vista, confermato peraltro da quanto ho ascoltato anche oggi, secondo me le donne possono fare la differenza. Lo fanno nella creazione, nell'utilizzo, nella formazione, nel mio caso, delle tecnologie spaziali a favore dello sviluppo sostenibile. Senza nulla togliere al contributo che anche gli uomini possono apportare, la mia esperienza mi ha insegnato che le donne sono più veloci, cioè intuitive, più attente, come diceva la Daniela, anche nella cura dei dettagli, inclusive per natura, più concrete e propense sicuramente alla cooperazione, anche internazionale. E quindi dalla mia esperienza posso dire che sicuramente la cooperazione è la chiave di volta culturale del vero sviluppo sostenibile, integrale e umano.
Grazie mille. Thank you, Gabriella. So with that, to continue on that, I hand over then to Daniela. You were speaking to us. I mean, you were presenting to us this culture of care as a contribution to achieve food security. Can you tell us more? Like, what do you think are the key elements we need to tackle in the dominant food system today, if we wanted to put in practice a culture of care?
Io vorrei ricondurre un pochettino a unità anche quello che stiamo dicendo, perché a mio parere stiamo con logicamente competenze e prospettive individuali diverse, però stiamo lavorando dentro un sistema unico. Cioè, quando io parlo di paradigma della cura, di cultura della cura, sto dicendo qualcosa che traiamo, che prendiamo fuori direttamente da un'analisi del contributo specifico del femminile alla storia e alle vicende umane di oggi, perciò anche in questo ambito straordinariamente ricco che è quello appunto del food system, però in tutti gli ambiti, come evidentemente abbiamo detto anche nel nostro panel. Perché? Perché parlando di cura io visibilizzo, rendo visibile qualcosa che non era visibile, e per questo ho la speranza di poter innestare qualcosa, come dire, una leva che dia la possibilità di avviare un processo di cambiamento reale. Perché parliamo di sottorappresentazione delle donne? Perché parliamo di carenza di partecipazione delle donne? Perché parliamo di difficoltà di leadership formative, educative, appunto, che devono guardare alle ragazze, alle donne, ma anche ai ragazzi e agli uomini? Proprio perché ci manca questa prospettiva che renda visibile il contributo delle donne. Allora, quando poi passiamo a dire quelli che sono i valori aggiunti, diciamo, no, del nostro agire tipico, specifico, diciamo cose che fino ad oggi sono poco visibili. Torno a usare questo aggettivo per essere più chiara. Ho l'impressione che se riuscissimo davvero a offrire un contributo anche attraverso l'antropologia cristiana, che è tipicamente un'antropologia di cura, un'antropologia di attenzione, che vuol dire appunto di concretezza, di responsabilità, ma vorrei dire una parola in più, non solo di responsabilità, ma di corresponsabilità mutua, reciproca, che chiama appunto a comporre continuamente alleanze col maschile, alleanze fra, non soltanto fra i generi, ma anche fra le generazioni, alleanze fra sani e malati, alleanze fra uomini e donne di diverse fedi e culture. Cioè, la cura è un ponte per l'alleanza. Ecco, per questo ho osato, spero che sia stato comprensibile, portare un argomento di questo tipo all'interno di di un seminario così tecnico, perché restando nel tecnico non ne usciamo, dobbiamo in qualche modo tentare di portare il nostro ragionamento su un piano unitario più ampio. Non so se può essere un contributo. Grazie.
Thank you very much, Daniela. Of course, this is a great contribution also on the way we work together. And I think it's also the experience we are trying to do today by bringing all these different perspectives in the same room, in the same virtual room. So now I hand over to close our sessions. We still have a couple of minutes. So with Susie and Lola, maybe I'm trying with my questions to go back to the food and peace, food and conflict focus of our session. So I will start with Susie, and I hope Susie is okay for you. There was also a question in the chat. Maybe you can start with that one. And then if you can tell us also, what would you expect from all of us here, different actors in the church? What do you think is in your perspective the contribution we can bring to build the food security for all? So I hand over to you, Susie.
Thank you so much, and thank you so much, Dr. Love, for the very good question in the chat, in which she asked about the money being spent now on nuclear weapons, nuclear modernization, and it's really overwhelming when you think about it's hundreds of thousands of dollars per minute that are spent on nuclear weapons. And that number has increased in the last year. So if you can imagine, it's hard for me to think about that. What is hundreds of thousands a minute on nuclear weapons in the time that we've been here today? It is overwhelming. And that money could very well go to other things. Now, I don't want to project a naive understanding to dismantle, to disarm, to destroy the nuclear weapons that have been built on this planet. That will cost money. To do it safely in a way that does not harm future generations, that will cost money. But it is a fraction of what is being spent on building instruments of catastrophe. So those resources could very well shift. And I study the contracts that companies get for building nuclear weapons. And I found, very surprisingly, one company both builds parts of the bomb and also cleans up areas. And it's better business for them to get in the cleanup game. So I would urge those companies to shift their business model. And for us, we're all living in societies where our tax money goes to support this, including in Italy, including in countries that host US nuclear bombs. Those citizens are also paying for these weapons. And we need to shift resources away from war and into real security. And that is one thing that when it comes to the church and the role of the church, to doing this and to support peace building and support women as peace building, today's session and this series has been spectacular. And it's a good step. But it's also been noted several times, it's a bit unusual to have so many women speaking. Let's make it more normal. That would be really good. And obviously this Zoom room is full of brilliant experts. I have learned so much from you. I'm so grateful. And I look forward to future sessions where I get similar opportunities. And I think as the church policies and the diplomatic strength and the convening power of the church is brought forward, we can make sure that when we bring people together, when we reach out to talk to others, that the rooms don't look the same. And they are representative of all of the society that we hope to build.
Thank you so much, Susie. So I leave it to Lola to close this session with really helping us also to wrap up in a way and to look also at the most vulnerable regions in the world where food insecurity is such a concrete challenge every day.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chiara, and a pleasure to share with Daniela, Gabriela, and Susie this session. Really amazing, and I learned so much. So for me, it's very clear. Look, what we saw in 2020 is just the tip of the iceberg on food insecurity, the disruption of food systems, how So many women, smallholder farmers, went from having a livelihood, producing, or the marketing, the selling, in the markets, the women, the commercial business, etc., how everything collapsed in our region of the world for some months, and it went into a stalemate. And people who were able to feed themselves, to be able to feed their children and be able to have a good livelihood, suddenly became in need of social protection, cash transfers, or food transfers to be able to survive. So what we have seen is what it may come unless we act rapidly. And I think we heard all of you saying, we need to be working early warning, prevention, preparedness, engage the women from the beginning, think together what can be disrupted and we can do now better and longer term to avoid that disruption to happen in the future. I really hope the Food System Summit will bring us that, will bring the whole of society together, bottom up, from the people we are supporting and working with communities, governments, etc., to engage with everybody, for everybody to have a voice. The People's Summit, they call it. It should be the People's Summit. The people should say what they need to be food secure, for this food system not to collapse again, as we saw it happening, but be sustainable and be helping all of us. There is enough resources in the world, as it was said by everybody, and especially if the nuclear weapons will be transforming food provision, food production, that will be an excellent one. But there is enough possibilities for everybody to be fed, everybody to have a good nutrition, children to be able to study, be productive girls and boys in the future. So let's not miss the opportunity. We have it there. And thank you very much for this invitation. Great talks and great recommendations out of here. Thanks, Chiara. I leave it there.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So this is the end of the second session. I think we all need a couple of minutes of break. So we will have something interactive that will accompany us in this break. But maybe take a moment to take a glass of water or to stand up a second, because we will have still another session in a couple of minutes. So thank you very much for your attention.
Microfono, please.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, please. Yes, I can hear you. Yeah.
Well, so please receive a warm welcome to the third session of this webinar, Food and Family, Women in the Social Economic Context. My name is Marcela Chapa, and today I am honored to guide the discussion with 4 outstanding women to understand the dynamic of families within the food systems and highlight the particular role women play, which is of course essential, but sometimes undervalued or taken for granted. Please join me today in greeting Dr. Marcela Villarreal, Director of the Partnership Division of the Food and Agriculture Organization of the UN, Professor Vera Zamagni, Professor of Economic History in the University of Bologna, Dr. Linda Ghisoni, Undersecretary of the Dicastery for Laity, Family, and Life of the Vatican for the first 3 interventions. And then we will be joined by Catalina Hinojosa Lopez, member of the Executive Board of the Economy of Francesco, that will share a live story, and then we will follow with a brief discussion. So now I invite Dr. Marcela Villarreal to take the floor, please.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. It's a pleasure to be with you today. I really want to say how much I have enjoyed all the discussions up to now. I think that there's been really important insights and ways forward on which we can build a better future for all. So thank you. Thank you for this really interesting dialogue. We're moving very quickly now to the Food Systems Summit, and which will be held in New York. But before that, we're going to have, as has been mentioned, a pre-summit here in Rome on transformation of food systems. So how can our food system, world food system, be more inclusive, resilient, and sustainable? Not easy, inclusive, resilient, and sustainable at the same time. And one of the important parts of this Food System Summit will be to identify game-changing solutions, which will help us transform our food systems precisely to make them more inclusive, resilient, and sustainable. Now, I really agree with what my sister agencies have said earlier today. Of course, IFAD and the World Food Programme, together with FAO, we are the Roman pole of the food agencies of the United Nations. Much has been said today, and I fully agree. But I'd like to go back to one of the points that has been raised, which is the importance of women's access to productive resources. We know if we want to have inclusive food systems, we cannot have an inclusive food system without half of the population and a very important part of the producers of that food, women. So how fundamental it is that women would have equal access to all of the productive resources that they need to be productive in agriculture. Land, of course, and that was mentioned already today. Very importantly, credit is a major issue. And then, of course, knowledge, technology, extension services, everything that women and men need to be productive in agriculture. And back to the study that has been cited today, and FAO study back in 2011, if women had the same access that men already have, even in poor areas in the world, to these productive resources, we would have major gains in agricultural productivity, in agricultural production, in food security, in nutrition of children, and so on. Lots of spillover effects, and the numbers are enormous. They've changed, of course, since the date of the study back in 2011, but the principles continue to be exactly the same. Ensure that women have access to productive resources in the same measure. We're not talking about rocket science, about doing something that's completely impossible. We're talking about conditions that are already there for men. So go over that barrier and you will have massive gains, not only in food security, but also in many other areas of development. Now, what has changed more recently? We are talking about food systems. This was not the case back when the study was produced in 2011, and it was certainly not the case when we were talking about the Millennium Development Goals. Today, talking about the Sustainable Development Goals, we have changed very much our take on how food is produced, how development is gained. The Millennium Development Goals, you will remember from 2000 to 2015, didn't even mention agriculture, except for distortion in trade. Otherwise, agriculture was not present in the whole agenda. Rural areas were not present in that whole agenda. In our current agenda, the Sustainable Development Goals, agriculture is very much present. And today, in the as we prepare to the Food Systems Summit, we are focusing on the concept of food systems. So everything around the production all the way to the consumption of that food, but that includes the actors, it includes the decisions that they make, it includes who makes the decisions, who shapes all of that outcome that is our current food system today. And mind you, our current food system is certainly not inclusive, it's not resilient, and it's not sustainable. Our current food system produces hunger massively, and increasingly so. And it also produces overweight, and it also produces obesity at the same time. And as was already mentioned, at the same time that this food system produces hunger, we're also throwing out, literally throwing out, around a third of all food produced. So there's massive flaws in our current food systems. So women are central contributors to food systems, central contributor through the whole, every single aspect of the food systems. However, as was already said, their role being so essential, it's not recognized and it's not counted as it should be. So it's not reflected in statistics. And if it's not counted, it's as if it doesn't exist. So we need to improve that aspect. In order to eradicate hunger, which is SDG 2, we firmly believe at FAO that it cannot be done without SDG 5, gender equality. It simply will not happen. Inclusive food systems will not happen without gender equality. So this has to be center stage whenever we are talking about food systems and whenever we are proposing all of these game-changing solutions, which will be the outcome of the Food Systems Summit next September. So again and again, we need to come back to the same point. Hunger cannot be eradicated without women's equal access to resources. Their roles need to be recognized and respected, addressed seriously with supportive policies, with incentives. And very importantly, as has been already said, they need to be able to participate in the decisions that are going to affect that food system. Now, hunger cannot be eradicated without women's equal access to resources. And we know that hunger has been increasing in the last 4 or 5 years. But remember, hunger was decreasing before that. There were several years in which hunger was slowly, but surely decreasing. Only in the last 4 or 5 years, there has been a very worrisome increase in world hunger. And there's 3 reasons here for this increase in world hunger. Conflict is a very important one, as mentioned also by Lola, climate change and economic downturn. Basically, it's these 3 reasons. Conflict is increasing and acute food insecurity is also increasing. Last year, we were talking about 135 million people suffering from acute food insecurity. And mind you, this is worse than chronic food insecurity. Chronic food insecurity, it's around 700 million people before COVID suffering. And acute food insecurity is people who need help, need aid in order many times even to make it to the next day. And who suffers more from acute food insecurity is, first of all, children, second of all, women. And that number of acute food insecurity has increased. This is our global report produced just last week. Last year, 135 million, this year, 155 million of people who are in an acute food insecurity situation, and most of them is because of conflict. Conflict, and sometimes the conflict itself uses hunger as a weapon of war always against the vulnerable, and again, who suffers more? Children and women, of course, men, obviously, too. So there's no peace without food security, and no food security without peace. Climate change also is having an ever increasing effect on smallholders who must produce in a weather that is changing, aside from all of the other impacts of climate change. And economic downturn with the COVID situation. FAO has calculated that just last year, due to COVID and the economic aspects, the downturn, hunger increased between 80 and 132 million people just last year, economic downturn. Now, I'd like to make a very important point. And for this, I'd like to refer to Laudato Si. Point here is that hunger can be defeated. We were already, before these more recent problems, we were on a track to eradicating hunger. It can be done. It can be done from all of these three different perspectives, from the main causes, from conflict, from climate change, and also from economic downturn. So Laudato Si cites directly positive examples of environmental improvement, like, for example, restoration of native woodlands, production of non-polluting energy, and other examples of positive interventions. Here again, we can all make our positive intervention to reduce the effects of climate change. Also, from the point of view of agriculture itself, Laudato Si, and I'd like to cite, agriculture in poorer regions can be improved through investment in rural infrastructures, a better organization of local national markets, systems of irrigation, and the development of techniques of sustainable agriculture. New forms of cooperation, importantly, and community organization can be encouraged in order to defend the interests of small producers and preserve local ecosystems from destruction. Truly, much can be done. End quote. So here again, you see the call of Laudato Si to have increased investment in agriculture and to bring forms of cooperation and community organization which are fundamental to develop a better relationship with nature. So much can be done. Now, how can we do it? And in order to, I'd like to bring to your attention the Decade of Family Farming. It's the United Nations Decade of Family Farming, which has been approved by United Nations resolution. And we're already into the second year of this decade, whereby we believe that by supporting family farmers in every aspect that they need to be supported, we will have a kind of agriculture like the one mentioned in Laudato Si, that is sustainable, that is resilient. But in order to do that, we need to empower the farmers. And in order to do that, we need to empower the women farmers. They need to be empowered to be able to have strong organizations, to be able to have their voices being heard and respected and recognized. If not, we will not be changing our food systems and transforming them in order to be more equitable and more resilient and sustainable. So the Decade of Family Farming has a global plan of action. It has 7 pillars, and one of these 7 pillars is for women family farmers and how they can be supported, how they can have better access to resources, equal access to resources, how their organizations can be strengthened, how their voice can be listened to and respected around the globe. So I'd like to invite all of you to support the Decade of Family Farming, and through this, to support the transformation of our global food system into being more equitable, very specifically through addressing women's needs, women's rights, and women's ability to have equal access to resources and their voice being heard. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Villarreal. Without much more, I will hand the word now to Professor Zamagni, a professor of economic history in the University of Bologna, so we can continue.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Yes.
Loud and clear.
Yes, thank you very much. I have listened with great participation to the denunciations of the still enormous discrimination against women around the world, and also to the devastating impact of conflicts on the problems of food security. I entirely agree also with many of you, say Susie, Gabriella, that important part by the women is to participate, to have the courage of taking out their talents. And if they do this, we have seen in this webinar how effective they can be in all their professions. The role that I carved out for myself in this webinar is to assure you that as an expert of the long-run evolution of the world economy, I can tell that women have played an incredibly positive role, even when and where they are still discriminated. And they have played a positive role on two sides, on the consumption side and on the production side. On the consumption side, it has been their responsibility to balance out the intake of the food available in diets that were adequate for each member of the family according to his, her age and state of health with appropriate hygiene. What I can tell you is that the lengthening of life from the Industrial Revolution onwards took place as a result of better food and better hygiene, and also vaccination then later, much more than on pharmaceuticals. Only 100 years later, from the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, pharmaceuticals played really an important role. But before, better food and more hygiene was what really mattered. And many epidemics were won precisely as a result of better food and more hygiene rather than any other intervention by the part of pharmaceutical. This role as a professional user of the resources available to the family has been recognized to the women since a long time and has given rise to a literature that speaks of the industrious revolution as the pendant of the industrial revolution on the production side. And certainly the industrious revolution has seen women as the major protagonists. So today we have to remind that progress takes place certainly in production, and I will be speaking of this in a minute, but also takes place on the consumption side under many accounts. First of all, because we have the responsibility to use the resources at best, but also because consumption can shape really production, give an incentive to production to change approach and also change direction. Therefore, in developed as well as in developing countries, the most important need is education for effective use of the resources, certainly food resources, but any other type of resource. And this I see that is not so much taken into consideration, because obviously much more interest is devoted to the production side, and this consumption side today suffers a lot of disregard. First of all, because all the efforts of the families to elaborate, to process resources inside the house no longer is so widespread, because we buy everything ready-made and ready to be eaten without any contribution by the family. But I mean, first of all, this helps in the direction of not the best use of resources, but also cannot be spread around the world, because in so many places and for so many billions of people, this change is not available. And therefore, to have an attention to the consumption side, I think it is very important. For instance, my suggestion would be to have in schools dietary courses, because many of our young people today have a very wrong diet. On the production side, what I can say is that family farming has played an extremely important role. Family farming means cultivating orchards, rearing small animals, hens, chickens, rabbits, goats, producing honey, for instance, but also in many places of the world, and Italy is certainly one, to rear cocoons that would produce silk, which was the basis really for an important activity and also important flows of trade. Now, it is well known that this farming agriculture is not only important from the point of view of granting important complements to the diet, to say complement the basic food like wheat or sorghum or maize and so on, but also it is extremely important to form inside the family the habit to contribute by work to the well-being of the family. And all the areas in which family farming was practiced, and doesn't matter whether it was on family-owned plots or on plots owned by someone else, but rented or granted in sharecropping activity. Now, all the areas in which family farming was practiced, then it was much easier to move towards family activities outside agriculture, because the family was used to work together, and the organization of the family was to the aim of being productive, and this gave dignity only to the children, for instance, but certainly to the women, because they could contribute to the well-being of the family. So, in my spare time, I am vice president of an Italian NGO, CEFA, which is present in several countries of Africa and Central America, teaching how to produce family farms. We offer them seeds, work tools, small animals, not to be able to carry family farms. And this is the beginning of really the autonomy of a family for self-support, not only in terms of food security, but also in terms of learning how to manage a business. So, in concluding, I consider the role of women in the food chain strategic, not only, as I said, for improvement in food security, but also in granting women dignity of life even before they get rights and equal rights, because they become active contributors to the well-being of the family. I insist on the fact that this is not only crucial in developing countries today, but has been important in the past in developed countries, and in terms of consumption is still extremely important today in developed countries, in which we witness an incredible increase in overweight people, in obesity people. This has been mentioned also by the person who spoke before me, and in the waste of resources and the throwaway of food. So my recommendation is that in developing countries, the possibility to have a family farming would be widespread, land grabbing would be under control, and it is not, in my way, in my opinion, so important at the beginning, you know, to have property rights, but the possibility to have family farming. Then, of course, if the equality of ownership also comes, that is terribly important, but it is not so necessary if we have the possibility to grant opportunities of family farming, even in a way different from direct ownership. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Samani. That was very interesting. I now hand the word to Professor Ghisoni, Undersecretary of the Dicastery for Laity, Family and Life of the Vatican.
Grazie per l'invito a questo webinar e grazie per i contributi così variegati che ho trovato molto ricchi in vista del summit che è previsto, organizzato dalle Nazioni Unite, dedicato ai sistemi alimentari. Se è vero che i cambiamenti di cui l'umanità ha bisogno oggi richiedono un intervento subito, immediato, ritengo che sarebbe da miopi non pensare a quello che può dare una svolta decisiva a lungo termine per raggiungere degli obiettivi necessari nel mondo attuale in tema di cibo. E la svolta passa, a mio parere, necessariamente per l'educazione delle nuove generazioni e per il ruolo della famiglia, in particolare delle donne. Dunque, quello a cui facciamo riferimento è un lavoro lento, è un lavoro impegnativo, quotidiano, il cui frutto sarà riscontrabile solo con il tempo, ma con benefici tangibili già nell'immediato. È difficile trattare in pochi minuti, nel tempo che ci resta, un tema così vasto che coinvolge le donne, le famiglie in contesti socio-economici tanto diversificati. Partire dall'educazione è certamente l'investimento che io ritengo sia il più redditizio. L'innesco al processo a più largo orizzonte che noi possiamo immaginare. E in questa prospettiva è stato inaugurato, sappiamo tutti, da Papa Francesco il Patto Educativo Globale e d'altro canto l'anno Famiglia Amoris Laetitia, iniziato in piena pandemia, ci spinge a rimettere al centro la famiglia e il suo ruolo cruciale nella nostra società. Papa Francesco, nella Laudato Si, ci ricorda che la famiglia è il luogo della formazione integrale, dove si dispiegano i diversi aspetti intimamente relazionati tra loro della maturazione personale. È interessante notare che il Santo Padre scrive questo dopo aver segnalato che nessuna norma giuridica può produrre effetti rilevanti, effetti duraturi, se non viene accettata a partire da motivazioni adeguate, da solide virtù, così nella Laudato Si 211. E nel percorso di formazione di motivazioni adeguate, di solide virtù, la famiglia è l'ambito educativo più efficace, dove con l'impegno perseverante si può dare valore a quei comportamenti che creano mentalità nuove, cultura nuova, riguardo il rispetto dell'ambiente, quindi allo sfruttamento delle sue risorse e alla loro distribuzione equa e solidale. Come leggiamo ancora nella Laudato Si, nella famiglia si coltivano le prime abitudini di amore e cura per la vita, come per esempio l'uso corretto delle cose, l'ordine e la pulizia, il rispetto per l'ecosistema locale e la protezione di tutte le creature. È difficile recuperare certi fondamenti con la sola scuola o esclusivamente con le norme e le leggi degli stati. La Chiesa ha sempre attribuito un ruolo preeminente alla famiglia nell'educazione. Mettere in grado i genitori di svolgere il proprio compito educativo è un fatto che gli stati debbono incoraggiare, rispettando i tempi che la famiglia dedica a questo compito e dedicando ad essa le politiche necessarie. L'impegno educativo apre a tutta una serie di conseguenze volte a plasmare nelle giovani generazioni, come spiega Papa Francesco in Amoris Laetitia, la volontà e lo sviluppo di buone abitudini, di inclinazioni a favore del bene, presentando come desiderabili dei comportamenti da imparare e inclinazioni da far maturare. In questo campo della famiglia come soggetto educatore, la donna è una presenza essenziale nella formazione dei figli. La donna è colei che può trasmettere ai figli il senso della custodia dei beni, tra cui il cibo. È la madre che con le sue doti di cura, ne abbiamo sentito parlare oggi in modo particolare, con la sua presenza può plasmare la volontà e lo sviluppo di buone abitudini nei figli. Noi siamo consapevoli, come ci ricorda Papa Francesco, che per quanto la coscienza ci detti un determinato giudizio morale, a volte hanno più potere altre cose che ci attraggono, se non abbiamo acquisito che il bene colto dalla mente si radica in noi come profonda inclinazione affettiva. Per questo non possiamo non investire in un processo lento e impegnativo, ma valido per incoraggiare comportamenti che abbiano un'incidenza diretta, decisiva nella cura di quanto ci è affidato. Quindi, se la domanda è oggi quale sia il contributo specifico che la donna può dare nell'assicurare giustizia nell'ambito dell'alimentazione, la risposta è fondamentalmente nel permettere alle donne di vedere valorizzato il tempo dedicato alla cura e alla crescita dei figli. Una valorizzazione che va messa in risalto in tutto quanto fa cultura, nei media, nelle politiche degli stati, nei programmi di formazione. Se nella narrativa sui media tradizionali, come sui social media, passasse la necessità del ruolo della donna in questo campo educativo, si imboccherebbe una strada efficace per un cambio di mentalità che è necessario. Purtroppo è ancora forte lo stereotipo della donna che per realizzare se stessa deve necessariamente ricoprire gli stessi ruoli e negli stessi tempi normalmente assegnati agli uomini, dovendosi liberare dal fardello della maternità. Percorrere questa via, a scapito di una presenza significativa della donna nella famiglia e nella formazione integrale dei figli, non farà sentire le donne migliori. Sono molte le donne che, senza voler rinunciare a una professione che comporti responsabilità impegnative, e lo abbiamo visto anche oggi tra le relatrici, non vogliono delegare ad altri la dedizione ai figli. Se è vero che l'educazione in famiglia aiuta ad imprimere nelle nuove generazioni l'orientamento al bene, alla giustizia, alla condivisione, a scelte responsabili, è anche vero che formazione e istruzione adeguate, grazie alla scuola o a progetti di avviamento al lavoro, significano il progresso di quell'ampia fetta di popolazione femminile mondiale impegnata nella produzione del cibo. Questo lo constatiamo nei numerosi progetti già in essere nel mondo. Anche oggi è stato dato un esempio da diverse relatrici, progetti promossi soprattutto a favore delle donne in contesti rurali. Penso a iniziative che alcune associazioni internazionali di fedeli riconosciute dalla Santa Sede promuovono in diversi paesi africani ad esempio, a favore di madri, favorendo la loro capacità imprenditoriale, l'accesso al credito, insegnando loro strategie per lo sviluppo di capacità di gestione delle terre da coltivare. Si tratta di progetti lungimiranti perché investono nell'educazione, nell'istruzione delle donne stesse, che a loro volta sono moltiplicatrici di un tale investimento culturale. La pandemia ci ha fatto sperimentare molto concretamente che non usciremo da questa crisi sanitaria e economica se non insieme, mettendo in comune possibilità, conoscenze, competenze e solidarietà. È necessario promuovere la collaborazione tra l'uomo e la donna, senza alimentare la competizione, valorizzando piuttosto l'apporto insostituibile di ciascuno per suscitare cambiamenti efficaci. Infine, è necessario sottolineare come le donne, soggetto centrale della cultura di cura, di cui ha parlato in particolare la professoressa Ropelato, richiamando Elena Pulcini, promuovono il dialogo intergenerazionale mentre agiscono come risposta vivente alla domanda che ci suggerisce Papa Francesco: che tipo di mondo desideriamo trasmettere a coloro che verranno dopo di noi, ai bambini che stanno crescendo? Scusa.
So we have to wrap up.
Okay. Excuse me. Ok, una domanda che secondo Papa Francesco deve condurci a degli interrogativi ancora più profondi. Siamo noi i primi interessati a trasmettere un pianeta abitabile per l'umanità che verrà dopo di noi. Dunque le donne, e chiudo qui, svolgono un ruolo educativo insostituibile, tanto nella Chiesa quanto nella società, in grado di contribuire efficacemente alla cura di relazioni con gli altri, con il pianeta in cui viviamo, con il cibo in modo particolare. Dare loro la parola, dare alle donne visibilità nei diversi sensi che abbiamo ricordato oggi, è un apporto fondamentale nel quadro del Vertice delle Nazioni Unite su sistemi alimentari. Grazie.
Thank you very much. We now close with the testimony of Catalina Hinojosa Lopez from Economy of Francesco. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for these insights and amazing speakers that we have today. Sufficient food for all is part of our way to conceiving the economy and how we think of integral human development. That's why I want to share today my personal and collective experience in Economy of Francesco, because we think that we cannot leave no one behind. Imagine you are a woman from an indigenous community, cropping and living from agriculture. You are not only discriminated for being woman, but also for being indigenous and farmer. The role of women in the food and agriculture system has always been a topic of debate because until nowadays, the female role is considered not important. Since I was a child, thanks to my parents and my active participation in the Focolare movement and the young people parish groups, I share with many people considered as marginalized populations. I met farmers, indigenous communities, and a culture of fair trade. Thus, I grew up with a strong awareness of people living in poverty, many family farmers who live in rural areas, who seek to survive the predatory market, lack of opportunities, public policies, and who have little or no access to land. My parents taught us some values such as service, help, listening, dialogue, and commitment to promote equality. It was not so common for a girl like me, who was born and lived in the capital city, to have social consciousness. But those human encounters pushed me to understand the importance of social and ecological justice. I realized that I could not be indifferent to the world suffering while I enjoy all the things that I have. I met indigenous farmers, women who work the land, take care of their children, and also have to be housewives, like Doña Juana, who lives in this countryside of Quito and who manage her daily life between land and household. These women are still those who cultivate and produce food and who sustain the world's population and their families. They are not only the strength during the manifestations, but are also the base for the productive and reproductive labor and caring in their families and the land they were working with. Although several declarations, international agreements, and public policies that include the important role of women in the agriculture and food system, there is still a gap with men, having not unequal financial facilities and programs, having a low or no access to land. Even laws and policies fostered by government does not recognize women as the direct beneficiaries of the change of the agricultural structure. In fact, the legal framework continues to talk about men as the family representatives, showing the discriminatory character of the laws. Until today, there is not enough policies and research about women in agriculture as a principal member to sustain it. Not understanding the complexity of the woman's-men's gap, I felt the responsibility to know certain realities better in order to find solutions. I saw that the system of unlimited economic growth caused the accumulation of land and capital in few hands by large transnational companies, sustained the status quo of men as head of the food systems. After my professional and academic experience, I discovered that I have to go into the wounds of our societies and understand the different forms of living of many communities. I connected with Afro-American, peasants communities, and indigenous people. For example, here, like in this photograph, in Salinas de Guaranda at 3,500 meters of altitude, whose work is based on cooperatives, like the Association of Women Textile Crafts that gave women other income sources. I felt the need to be the voice of the excluded people within and outside international organizations and look for mutual collaboration. That's why I decided to study the master's degree in international cooperation and human rights at South Ecuador to challenge myself by interculturality and diversity. My master's thesis about family farming in Ecuador guided me to recognize even more my roots, identity, and the buen vivir. Making the research, I learned how women continue to be the most excluded in the food and agriculture system. Although women carry traditional knowledge, caring for the creation and food sovereignty, a role has been denied. I remember Doña Michita, my friend's mother, who is doctor from Otavalo and who has a traditional knowledge about plants and seeds used for medical and food needs. Knowledge that it's passed through generations and shared by La Minga cropping and harvesting in their lands. This memory was my input for my thesis, in which I highlighted the complementary indigenous vision and profound relationship with nature and people, and the women who are involved in the agrarian and food systems are able to organize and manage better things, leaving aside the gap between women and men. After graduating from my master, I was living in a community from the Focolare movement, and I felt the necessity to come to the earth, to understand the reality of women farmers in the world. With my friends, we built an organic vegetable garden, as you can see. Just go back to the Mother Earth. put our hands on earth, and work together gave us the sense of empathy to farmers, especially women who work so hard to provide us food. When I heard the Pope Francis call to young economists, entrepreneurs, researchers, and change makers to reanimate the economy, I decided to be part of this movement. And this is the experience of Economy of Francesco. My professional and personal journey had brought me to accept this challenge, working with others, creating this synodal process of doing things. This knowledge and experiences motivated me to participate in the Economy of Francesco village of agriculture and justice in order to change the narratives of the food and agriculture system in the world and to be new projects to protect nature and to accompany people challenged by these situations. In order to give a soul to the economy of tomorrow, as Pope Francis said, we need to follow the San Francis footsteps. Economy of Francesco became an intercultural and intergenerational community, which gathered together to exchange ideas, proposals, projects, and a huge variety of views. We created networks between the 12 theme groups, the so-called villages, which has allowed us to heal the wounds of the sick economy. When the pandemic seemed to stop the whole process, we reinvented ourselves. We decided to begin our work online. As Agriculture and Justice Village, we are aware that the solutions of the agricultural system, food security, and sovereignty will never come without the women. We discover even more the crucial role of indigenous and rural women in the food systems. For that reason, we embarked on some projects which aim to build a strong global coalition around two main themes: women's right to land and food sovereignty. One of the projects started during the pandemic in Florianópolis, Brazil, inserting organic and agroecological product basket distribution to people in vulnerable conditions. The project wants to articulate ways to facilitate the access to health, food, and in vulnerable areas, research about feminism and the role of the woman in the building food security. This is an ongoing process, and the young people are keep tracking, researching, and organizing the best way to support women and vulnerable people. This great disposition and openness become a strength for our village, in which we question ourselves about our position in front of the current system and in the capacity to idealize and articulate global and local efforts to reverse the historical and structural inequalities that affects women's life and that impacts everyone in the common house. And finally, as Pope Francis says in this encyclical Fratelli Tutti 35, if only we might rediscover once for all that we need one another, and that in this way our human family can experience a rebirth with all its faces, all its hands, and all its voices beyond the walls that we have erected. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Catalina. Unfortunately, we are running out of time for the discussion, but I just wanted to highlight the very important contributions of our guest speakers today, the importance of fostering the role of women in, for example, family farming, which both Dr. Villarreal and Dr. Samani expressed through the historical components of it that Dr. Samani highlighted, but also the concrete practices that some other international organizations are working as a FAO. And also, of course, the role that women play in education, in fostering care, and fostering in families, and the enthusiasm that young people are actually putting with that concrete testimony of Catalina to change systems, to change the way women and the marginalized access food and contribute to a more sustainable, resilient, and inclusive food system, as Marcela Villarreal pointed in the beginning. To conclude, I am gonna now pass the word to Monsignor Chica Arellano for the concluding remarks.
Muchas gracias, estimados y estimadas colegas presentes en la sala y en la pantalla, apreciadas oradoras y moderadoras. Muchas gracias a todos por haber participado en este enriquecedor encuentro. Quisiera agradecer especialmente al Foro Roma de Organizaciones de Inspiración Católica, porque ustedes son la encarnación de lo mucho que se consigue cuando cada uno brinda lo mejor de sí mismo para edificar lo que a todos beneficia. Doy las gracias a las moderadoras, a las oradoras, que con competencia y con acierto han subrayado excelentemente el papel fundamental que desempeñan las mujeres, sobre todo las mujeres rurales, en la crucial tarea de alimentar al mundo durante y después de la pandemia de COVID-19, aportando su contribución en el trazado de sistemas alimentarios resilientes y sostenibles, de modo que nadie quede atrás. No me cabe duda de que cuanto han dicho las ponentes, con sus conocimientos y clarividencia, servirá de inspiración para hacer frente a una crisis tan compleja como la alimentaria. En las distintas propuestas hemos percibido cómo las mujeres saben apostar por la novedad, al margen de tópicos manidos. Ellas no se contentan con alcanzar metas mediocres. Buscan más bien injertarse hondamente en la sociedad, por encima de discriminaciones que les impidan roturar senderos de justicia, de solidaridad y de equidad. En este sentido, tienen mucho que ofrecer desde perspectivas realistas y originales en el proceso preparatorio de la cumbre sobre sistemas alimentarios que en julio se desempeñará en Roma y luego en septiembre en Nueva York. Es claro que la vigente pandemia ha exacerbado las lacras y debilidades que hipotecan nuestros sistemas alimentarios, desde el acceso desigual a recursos financieros para productores agrícolas locales, hasta la mayor vulnerabilidad de dichos productores debida a los funestos efectos del cambio climático. Por desgracia, las mujeres frecuentemente se encuentran entre los grupos que deben soportar el mayor peso de estas crisis. Como afirma con insistencia el Santo Padre, doblemente pobres son las mujeres que sufren situaciones de exclusión, maltrato y violencia, porque frecuentemente se encuentran con menores posibilidades de defender sus derechos. Sin embargo, también entre ellas encontramos constantemente los más admirables gestos de heroísmo cotidiano en la defensa y el cuidado de la fragilidad de sus familias. Particularmente en los países en vías de desarrollo, las mujeres representan un porcentaje muy elevado de la mano de obra agrícola y, sin embargo, carecen de la suficiente preparación o de la tecnología necesaria, soportando asimismo agotadoras y dilatadas jornadas de trabajo. A menudo tampoco están representadas suficientemente en aquellos organismos y foros políticos, económicos y sociales donde se toman las decisiones más importantes, no solo para el presente, sino también de cara al futuro. Teniendo en cuenta cuanto se ha señalado previamente, la crisis COVID-19 tiene que ser entendida no como un obstáculo, sino como un desafío que indica que las cosas pueden ser diferentes, siempre mejores. Triste, muy triste, sería que tras la cruel emergencia sanitaria que está fustigando nuestro planeta, volviéramos a repetir los errores de siempre. Si queremos cambiar positivamente de rumbo, las mujeres no pueden ser minusvaloradas ni pueden quedar atrás. Hemos de escuchar su voz. No se trata de regresar a situaciones donde la mujer no tenga las oportunidades que le son propias. Las dificultades actuales a causa del coronavirus han de solucionarse resolviendo crisis preexistentes y reformulando nuestros sistemas para lograr la justicia y la seguridad alimentaria de una vez por todas. ¿Por qué la Iglesia se involucra en esta tremenda travesía? Porque como señala el Papa Francisco, una auténtica fe siempre implica un profundo deseo de cambiar el mundo, de transmitir valores, de dejar algo mejor detrás de nuestro paso por la tierra. En este sentido, las mujeres tienen claves fundamentales para hacer de este sueño de alimentos para todos una concreta realidad. Este encuentro que ahora clausuramos ha recogido testimonios significativos de cómo la mujer ha sido y es, en innumerables circunstancias, protagonista de una justa alimentación y de un cuidado esmerado de nuestro planeta. Se trata, por tanto, de reconocer y apreciar su sabiduría y de facilitarles los medios y los espacios necesarios para que puedan ser consideradas cabalmente a lo largo de estos procesos. Las mujeres tienen la llave, como dicen nuestros compañeros de la Comisión Vaticana COVID-19, para preparar un futuro más resiliente, sostenible, solidario e inclusivo para todos. Los cambios que el mundo necesita hoy para ser mejor requieren la intervención de la mujer. Invertir en la potenciación de esta dinámica nunca será estéril. Para la Santa Sede, con este primer seminario, se ha querido poner de manifiesto el gran papel que la Iglesia ha desempeñado en la promoción de la mujer. Este evento rema a favor de esta noble causa, haciéndose eco también del quehacer de tantas entidades eclesiales empeñadas en hacer oír la voz de la mujer, para que sus afanes sean valorados adecuadamente y, en concreto, para que se repute esencial su contribución en la preparación de la cumbre sobre los sistemas alimentarios, manifestando así que sin la palabra y la creatividad de la mujer nunca se hará realidad la consecución del Objetivo de Desarrollo Sostenible número 2 de la Agenda 2030 de las Naciones Unidas. Que cuanto hemos dicho hoy en esta sede no quede perdido, sino que sea un pujante estímulo para apremiarnos a nosotros mismos y a las instituciones a actuar según una cultura del encuentro, de la complementariedad, del cuidado y de la solidaridad, para dar así respuestas eficaces al hambre y la malnutrición, así como a otras problemáticas que afectan a la dignidad de todo ser humano, especialmente a las mujeres, cuya aportación ha de ser visibilizada, reconocida y fomentada. Muchas gracias a todos.